Yeah. No, Thomas Jefferson did a good job there.
His whole little retired Rob. Welcome.
Lauren, did you get my text
Great school.
about the Tetons?
No, we talked though.
Oh, I texted you about it.
All
I
right,
made it.
we're gonna go ahead and get started here. Good evening, thanks for everyone attending. Craig, thank you very much for coming to spend some time with us. For those of you who don't know, this is Mr. Call, father of the infamous Mr. Call over here. And he's a land use attorney, so we're grateful that you would come and share some time with us. Commissioners, welcome. We'll be excusing, I guess, Chairman Thomas and Commissioner Nancaro this evening. Mr. Mason, if you could follow up, make sure they have notes from their parents for their excuse, would be good today. So, we'll go ahead and get started. Tonight we have Council Member Severing with us, who's going to give us the Pledge of Allegiance and the prayer of thought tonight, Council. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
Heavenly Father, we come before thee and we collectively give to thee our thanks for the bounties that we enjoy. We're so thankful to live in this beautiful city, this great community with so many wonderful people that we associate with. And we pray that tonight in our deliberations and discussions that we would make decisions that would best benefit the citizens and the growth of the city. And we, particularly this night, Heavenly Father, pray for those who might be in our community, who might need physical and spiritual strength to attend them in their challenges and in their lives. And pray that you'll heal those. We give thanks for our many blessings, and we pray for this tonight in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilman Severing. So we have numerous items tonight on our agenda. Does anyone have any conflicts of interest regarding our discussions this evening? All right, seeing none, we'll go into our active agenda and we'll seek public comments. Looks like, Katie, you would be looking for comments online since we don't have any public here tonight.
We do not have any public comments at this time.
Rob, you coming up to make a comment on behalf of the public? You just get treats.
Blue Diamond is the sponsor choice tonight.
All right, great. Anything, Katie?
No, not at this time.
All right, we're gonna go ahead then and move on with our agenda. So Mr. Call can give us some training and not spend all night here. So Mr. Call, I turn the time to you.
Appreciate the chance to be here. Not as much for what I might teach as what I might learn, because I haven't been on the front lines in a while and you guys do that on a regular basis. So I'll be interested in the conversation, which is kind of what I'd like to conduct. I had a remarkable time on Memorial Day. It's been, each year we take a moment and think about what that's about. But for some reason, it was more touching than ever for me. I watched the PBS on Sunday night. There was a public broadcasting system special Memorial Day presentation from Washington, which was incredible. And I've been thinking about the difficulties we face as a country. None of us thought 5 years ago. I mean, if we tried to guess 5 years ago what would be the big issues that we face as a country, we wouldn't have guessed very well, probably, where we'd be and what we're worried about. Of course, today is the 100th anniversary of the race massacre in Tulsa, and that's been on all the public television stations. And as I thought about this, I wonder how much of all this angst that we're experiencing today, how much of this resorting originated with each family in each community and the relationships in that community. And what a remarkable thing it is that you volunteered, more of us, if not specifically for each situation you find yourselves in, at least generally, to help manage this on behalf of the many residents of North Ogden. So what we do, I think, matters. It makes a difference in the long run. And so I'm interested in engaging with you in this conversation. To show you how it matters, this is a little anecdote about a guy in New York. Yeah, Potsdam, New York. He came into the planning commission and he asked if he please could rezone his property. Now, I don't know about what you think the needs of your community are, but I can hardly imagine a need in Potsdam, New York that it would exceed that of a Dunkin' Donut. And all he wanted to do is put in a Dunkin' Donut shop. And that sounds like a great idea to me. But for some reason, the folks in Potsdam didn't think it fit in generally. And I don't have a real strong opinion on the issue. They knew the master plan and what was going on better than me, and perhaps even better than this gentleman. But he wasn't amused by the answer. And he knew it was final. He couldn't do anything about it. And so he thought he would probe the boundaries of other things that the city does and doesn't like. He decided that what he would do is beautify the property with flowers. And he was looking around for inexpensive containers that he could use to beautify the property and thus lend to what seemed to be the aesthetic concerns of the city. So he did that. He created beautiful gardens. How do I click? Am I clicking that wrong? There we go. He found some inexpensive containers and he really livened up the place. See, there we go. The entry. And of course, the site itself. And so he may have got his point across, I guess. But they're in court and it makes interesting legal, is that art? Is that landscaping? What is that really? Oh, we're turning it on. Okay. Thank you. Anyway. Or did we turn it on? I'm really clicking and honest. There we go. Okay, luckily I only got 3 slides, so it's going to be a whole lot easier now. As we look at our positions and what we do, by the way, let me kind of tell you what my connection is. I was the property rights ombudsman in the state for a while, for 10 years, created the job. That was a long time ago because now it's in the 3rd guy and it's been 14 years since I signed off. And before that, I served in the legislature. I had the honor of serving on the city council in Provo. And that was interesting odyssey. I remember sitting one night in the council study place, which was, Provo has a council chamber, which is surrounded by a gallery. And there's a great artist of earlier Provo, and some of his work was displayed in the gallery. Now I think most of it's been converted to council offices. They have the municipal council, strong mayor form of government there. So the council has its own staff and the mayor is a different, has her own staff, and the council needed some space. But anyway, there was a painting on the wall that showed I forget what they called it, the Black Hawk War or something. In early Provo history, within a few years of the founding, there was disagreements with the Native Americans who, of course, were not necessarily pleased that their land had been appropriated. And so there was some shooting that happened. And there's this battle, a picture of the pioneers on the battlefront behind barricades and shooting. And I couldn't get the picture to hang right. I mean, every time I came in, it was tilted. And finally, I decided to leave it there because it occurred to me that this job of being on the council was an uphill battle. And those guys were always firing uphill, and maybe we were too. But there have been interesting things that have happened lately. in land use law. And so a few years ago, about 15, I wrote this book on Utah land use regulation. And the reason you haven't seen it is it's been out of print. So we're updating it, and then we'll try to get more available, partly because one of the things the legislature did this year was to mandate planning commissioner training. So when a new planning commissioner serves on a planning commission, when they're first appointed, they have to take an hour of training before they even can offer their first vote. But it's meant to be somewhat informal, and some of that can be online, and there's great resources at the League of Cities and Towns and the Utah Land Use Institute for that training. So anyway, let's just talk about this. So I sat down today and tried to just look at the lay of the land. And it occurred to me, I mean, I sat down and wrote questions like, why do we do this? What is our purpose? And one of the old discussions I heard in land use school years ago, the idea was that planning is only started out with the idea that we'd use that tool to prevent harm. I remember reminding those who said the local government had no role in managing private property that back when our rights were pure and the pioneers first settled the valleys of Utah, the first ordinance the Provo City Council adopted after its incorporation in 1851 was a fence ordinance. It required people to keep their animals on the property so they weren't wandering around. So this idea that there's a role for local government, even in the most pure libertarian pioneer context, is not hard to defend. But anyway, so I thought, why do we do this? Are we trying to prevent harm? That's morphed into promoting good. So now instead of just trying to do things to stop people from doing things, we now have a whole host of regulations to encourage people to do the right thing and to promote, you know, the progress of the community. And then I thought, well, who has a role in this? And then who else cares? Well, so I thought down who has a role in this? And the 5 entities that I've circled are kind of those who help create the law and make the decisions about what the law is going to be. And then I gave the courts and the Constitution a gold star because they really have the final say when the issues come up. But they rarely get involved, and most of the time they don't. You know, what we try to do is guess what they do if it came to them, and then try not to go there for reasons that are obvious. But these things are kind of changing. And outside those who make the law, we certainly have those that are very, very influential, the property owners, public interest groups that are becoming more and more involved. I mean, the PETA, the folks after animal rights and protection of animals, the Southern Utah Alliance, the Utah River Council, the Black Lives Matter group. I mean, all kinds of folks are having an influence now in land use decisions. And then, of course, I didn't want to leave them out. We have private utilities, including private or local districts and others that are all have a role in what this happens. And if I'd had more time, I probably would have drawn more circles. I'm sure I haven't got them all. But this relationship between the 5 that I've listed to start with as the prime movers in this is going through some kind of amendment lately. And we have a fall conference each year at the Utah Land Use Institute, and we've decided this year we're going to focus on the relationship between local government and the state legislature, because that seems to be a hot topic these days. In fact, you're aware that the state legislature started with what they call MIDA, which was Hill Air Force Base, the Development Administration for the military improvements there. And then they decided to use that pattern for the inland port. And now they're talking about it at the point of the mountain where the prison was, or is, and soon won't be, that they're basically just pulling the land use authority out of it and giving it to a commission, so that the city of Draper, is my impression, will have very little to say about what goes on in 600 acres of development at the point of the mountain, which is going to be, I mean, it'll move the critical mass of business and commerce right to the boundary between Utah and Salt Lake counties. I mean, it's really planning to be quite a big deal. The inland port, of course, the idea was to try to do all that could be done to expedite commerce in that west side of the Salt Lake Valley, and not to necessarily get involved. You know, I'm guessing about this in having citizens, the untidiness of having citizens necessarily. I'm really getting editorial here, but it just seemed to be a whole lot more efficient if we didn't have to go through the planning commission process of deciding how we were going to use hundreds of acres of ground. And so, as you know, Salt Lake City was greatly disturbed by this. The idea that they would basically have a few seats on a commission, and their interests and the interests of everyone else would be represented by that process. But this is kind of the lay of the land. This is where we're at. What concerns does it raise for you, and what are your thoughts about this at this point? Does that affect North Ogden at all?
Well, it does seem the legislature is trying to take a lot of authority from municipal government. You know, saying you can't do this, you can't do this, you know, trying to impose their will on local communities. This seems like that's a movement that they're.
So
This
why?
last session, we had House Bill 98.
Yes.
That was, in my opinion, a direct assault on local communities having control and protecting residents from builders.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, led by an individual who's heavy in the builder representation field.
Yeah.
It seems to me that there's an assumption built in there that we know best. And big decisions about moving the fence at Hill Air Force Base or vacating some ground, you know, on the south end of the Salt Lake Valley, or the inland port, you know, that it's best, instead of citizens being involved or local community elected representation being involved, that we can form a committee, and that committee should be able to decide what's best for Utah as a whole, in a way. And that seems a bit potentially problematic. It's not the way things were started in our country, and it's not the way things seem to function quite well when everyone gets a vote.
But I ask myself, is that born out of an arrogance of we know best, or of, oh, the process is so ugly and difficult that this is faster and easier, right? I mean, I guess I'm just an optimist, and I think people are generally have good intentions, and that sometimes results in bad legislation like that, you know, but you know what I mean? The process
Sure.
is hard, so that's got to be part of it too.
I think at some level, the process is meant to be hard, though. I mean, especially when you're talking about governing. One of the things that bothers me, that's just a general trend happening, is power just seems to be getting pushed up and up and up and up. So we've got, instead of really specific decisions being made on a local level, where the problems are known better. It's like we know what's happening in North Ogden a lot better than somebody at the state legislature does. And, you know, we have a couple of guys down there, but as you know, I like to talk about Milton Friedman's economics of efficiency, right? It's like the most efficient is your own money on yourself, and then about equal is somebody else's money on you, or you on somebody else's, you know, kind of that. And then the worst is somebody else's money on somebody else, which the further up the government chain you go, that's what you get. And it's painted with a big broad brush, and they're just wasteful. And so I see this happening more and more, where we've got a president who's now, you know, signing off on $1 trillion stimulus packages. I'm like, whoa, hold the phone. You know, and I'm seeing it just kind of gradually creep in now, you know, into states, and you know, and it's concerning to me. You know?
Sure.
You know, if you look at the people inside the legislature, they were really upset about the pandemic and the healthcare industry trying to shut down the economy.
Mm-hmm.
So they're so driven by what's happening in our state and the economy. I think what they're doing here is they're trying to prevent cities like ourselves from limiting growth and putting speed bumps in the economy. So they're saying we're going to take control as much as we can of that so that cities can't limit growth. I think every member on this council's probably heard from one or two citizens about how come you're letting people develop in the city? And Councilman Swanson always tells them, well, it's their ground. Well, you know, if it's zoned for it, not much we can do about it.
Yeah.
And I think they're trying to actually start controlling what we can do in regards to zoning.
Well, and they being the legislature, but let me also newsflash this just in, the citizens. So a group of high-flying, well-backed, credible, competent development group worked a deal with Salt Lake City to build high-density housing on a 10-acre site in Salt Lake City. Before they vested, and you know what that means, before the applications were submitted and complete, the citizens launched an initiative to downzone the land. So that is going to court. And the point is, I think the law's on the side of the citizens. Because the Supreme Court has said with the power of initiative and referendum, the citizens comprise a co-equal branch of government with the legislative. They're a co-equal member of the legislative branch. So citizen at the ballot box, when initiatives and referenda are passed, considered, are co-equal with the lawmaking body in terms of legislative powers. And so since city councils all the time rezone one piece of property at a time, then it dawned on somebody, bright lawyer, that he could in fact work with these citizens if they hired him to downzone the property by the ballot box. That's a little difficult to do in Salt Lake City because you have several 100,000 members, you know, voters. And so that means a petition drive of it'd take a lot of effort. You might be able to do a few thousand signatures in North Ogden, but it would take tens and tens of thousands of signatures in Salt Lake City. But that's just another trend going on. Again, because of this sense of disenfranchisement. So partly it seems the legislature feels like they're not, like their interests they represent, their perspective. I don't mean to make this sound too sinister. From their point of view, some people are not getting a fair shake. And the legislature, I mean, the problem they have is they don't have a sharp instrument to work with. They just have blunt instruments. And by the way, you should have seen 98 before it passed.
I saw the first draft.
Well, yeah, but now they've limited it, and it's the greatest incarnation to allow design standards on townhomes, but still not on single family homes. And that just kind of came out of nowhere. I serve on the land use task force, which is an informal group of private and public individuals, a group of 30 that gets together and tries to pound out the legislation. But this was not pounded out in that group. And yet finally that group had to either take a stand, or as the league decided to, take no stand on that issue because it just came screaming out of nowhere and had a lot of initiative. But the question is, how do we get to the point where all these moving parties get to this point? In Weaver County, there's an effort now to extend the inland port from its base in Salt Lake City to West Weaver County. So there'd be a satellite. And that's interesting because West Weaver County was just the subject of an incorporation vote. So whether it had incorporated or not, I guess, if the state legislature designated that as part of the inland port, then that area would develop without the control of what would have been West Weaver City.
And this would be under the purview of this commission.
There'd be a commission.
And who appointed the commission?
Well, the legislature sets the appointees and they try to include all the interest groups. So there'd be citizens, the legislators, local government officials, county, city, and there'd be industry representatives and others that would serve together.
Is there a way of voting off someone who's on the commission?
I don't know that, but typically the legislation sets it up. They're appointed for terms, and usually that's attrition and rolling over rather than, I don't know, I'm not familiar with a device in this commission, this carve out land use management program where a person's removed. Of course, we don't have a strong recall opportunity in Utah anyway at any level. But I don't know. I mean, there have been some times of river city councils where they have been disappointed with the planning commissioner, so they chose to disappoint the planning commissioner, unappoint. And it didn't work very well because the town ordinance simply says you serve a term of years. And they can be reappointed, but they can't be disappointed.
Just want to know. if you want
Sure.
to-
Yes.
I had a comment or a question about what we were talking about before, and I'm always interested in the story behind the legislation. You know, what influential citizen got upset so badly about design standards on their home being imposed by a city that they ratcheted it up, you know, to the legislature to change this. But I think the other side of it, just, you know, I'm new, I've been here 3 weeks. I've seen my fair share of building issues that have happened over time. And I don't think North Ogden is unique to this, but while I've been here, we have 2 foundations that were poured in the wrong spot, like not even correctly sited on the position or on the property. One home built on the wrong lot and another home that was built crossing a property owner's property so much that we're having to do a subdivision, a plat amendment. So
Boundary line adjustment.
yeah, it's essentially, but it's a whole piece, so it's its own parcel. So the question, I guess, is, I know that the land use task force works really closely with legislators and with other folks in developing this, but at what point do we raise our hand and say, these aren't speed bumps, these are literally like development pieces moving so quickly that either, you know, we aren't able to catch it in time, or the development community is moving so quickly, they're not catching these mistakes in time. And what's, you know, what house has to, you know, have some catastrophic failure or some other thing have to happen to where it's like, oh, you know, if it's a difference between now and 2 weeks from now to make sure that your architectural plans are drawn correctly, so that the site plan is reflected correctly, so that the architectural, you know, submittals as civil are right, so you don't have a foundation for 3 feet wrong. Like, the issue happened 8 months ago. It was at site plan approval, not at construction drawing documents. And it was those 2 arms of the development company not talking to each other. Mistakes happen, we resolved that one, but I look at it as that's protecting the public's best interests. That's not having developers coming in and asking for forgiveness on these mistakes because things are ramping up and going so quickly that you can't, you know, you run into that. So I would be interested in maybe posing that question to the league, to Meg Ryan or others, and say, what of these types of stories are you hearing in your community? Because I would think that the legislative community, made up largely of, you know, folks who represent building interests, would be interested in hearing those types of stories too. To say, this is, you know, we're not trying to block development. We're trying to make sure that development is good and positive and done in a way that benefits all of our communities.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting the
Sure.
last 6 months, you know, watching.
Well, there's no question the legislature runs on stories. I mean, House Bill 98, for those who don't know, the bill basically provides for private building inspectors. If the public inspectors, under certain circumstances, the developer can choose to use a private inspector instead of a public one. And that discussion has been going on for some years. But then someone slipped in there because of an anecdote. What happened was a city that will remain nameless changed the design standards after a person already had the subdivision approved. And so changed the whole fundamentals of how much the building was going to cost by after the builder had already committed and done some things that was irrevocable. And so rather than saying, well, the legislature did 2 things in response to that anecdote. One of them, and you've heard about this, I'm sure, once the subdivision is approved, the building permits to be issued in that subdivision are to use the land use laws that are in place when the subdivision is approved for 10 years. So the land use law can't be changed for 10 years to apply to those lots. And I was in the thick of that, and I said, but what if it's a public emergency? What if you're finding out the ground, you know, there's a fault line or the ground's not stable or something? And they said, well, we'll fix it later. So it's, the dynamics are interesting once you get there, but your point is well taken, that the stories need to come from all sides. And it's that these things don't go away. I attended the League of Cities and Towns conference in St. George last month, and there was more of a buzz of frustration among city officials with the communication breakdown between the channels they think they're using to get to the legislature than I've heard before. And those things have a way of fixing themselves. The good thing about the league is it's a wide open discussion process. You know, there's dozens of people on the legislative committee, and these things are talked about. But the bad thing is to do it late. And that's the problem, is a lot of this came within the last 10 days of the legislature. And it was hard to stop the train once it's rolling. But again, step back to what's going on here. You've got, I mean, in the American form of government, the basic unit of government is the state. The states created the federal government. The states also created political subdivisions of the state, including every government entity that's not a federal entity. So local districts and cities and counties and commissions that handle, you know, large carve-out districts are all creatures of the state legislature. Although the Constitution in Utah is, you know, a pretty long document, it does talk about cities and counties and those kinds of things. But even the Constitution originated with the state organizing convention in the late 19th century. So the legislature giveth and the legislature taketh away, and the legislature is the focus, unless the courts intervene, of how these things are sorted out. So it's essential to stay in really close contact with the legislature. Plain City and Far West are represented by Matt Glynn, who was on the Far West City Council. And that's, you know, that gives him of course, he worked for the city of Roy, and that's helpful. Our West Side Senator works for the city of Ogden. So that gives a city perspective. And I think if you did a survey, you may find more people with that kind of connection to cities than you find people that are developers and builders outright full-time. If you include realtors, then you get a larger group of people that have this private interest focus. But you also have a lot of folks that are there for the best of intentions who really don't get it and rely on their friends. I think one of the things that's going on, of course, is that the leadership in both bodies clearly is focused on those who understand property interest better. I shouldn't have even started that sentence, who have a strong connection to property interests. And that's where we are this week. Other comments?
Can I
Sure.
turn back to that comment a little bit, a few things that you said? You know, it feels like in the state, there's this urgency to provide housing, to get things done, you know, development. You know, Utah, things are changing. I mean, when I graduated from Weber High in 1992, most of my, you'll always rule. Most of my peers left
That
the
was
state.
before Fremont was built.
It is.
Okay.
Before
Thank
Fremont
you.
didn't exist.
Okay,
back
I
then.
understand.
But most of my peers left the state to get jobs out of state because the jobs that people were looking at weren't as available in the state of Utah. And that's changed, and it's very quickly changed. In that a lot of my peers who left the state are now looking at ways to come back to Utah because those jobs are available. You know, I worked for a Bay Area company for a long time. There's people from the Bay Area that are moving to Texas. Some of them are coming here. There's things that are changing. And it seems like there's this urgency to provide housing and to, you know, develop cities out and things like that. I think one caution to that is if we try to move so quickly, especially at this time when things are pointing towards the growth of the Intermountain West and Utah specifically, that we may do ourselves a disservice, not only for problems like that, but also to the people who are trying to be business owners to help create that change and growth. You know, they have a timing expectation on how long it takes something to get through a city, what the steps are going to be, and their financial plans and business plans play into that. And if we create a pace that's not sustainable because we have problems like this and tie them up in, you know, legal issues and things like that, if it's an unsustainable pace, it's problematic on a lot of fronts.
Sure.
But if we create a pace that's sustainable, it seems to me that we create a much better present and future by just having a reasonable pace of change in a time that our state is changing a ton. And I think that really applies to North Ogden. I've lived in various parts of the state, and we have beautiful mountains here.
Yes,
We have a beautiful community that still has a certain amount of open space,
a lot of room to expand
a
too.
lot of room to expand, and we have housing prices when you compare them to going south, that, you know, we have good schools and people are looking at moving here, and they'll be looking at starting businesses here. But if we create a pace that's too fast for us to adapt to and to do it right, we really are setting everybody up for failure. But if we do it at a pace where we can handle it, we can make good choices, then I think that's one of the keys to making this change successful. Like I feel this urgency, like we got to do it yesterday. And I'm not sure that that's the right approach. I think it's going to happen, but it's got to happen at a pace where all the interested parties can kind of come together and have a vote and get it done right and have it look nice and have it be productive, rather than throw something up and take it down and pour a wrong foundation and, you know, run into some safety issues that we just didn't get a chance to look at it. So I think my whole point to that is I think pace accelerating could be problematic.
Well, and there is a time, and I'll appreciate any comments, let me just interject this. The interesting thing is that the land use reforms that were adopted 16 years ago in 2005 delegated to the city the opportunity to avoid every public hearing and everything the planning commission does, except changing zones, changing the zone on the zoning map, rewriting the regulations, adopting the general plan, the moderate income housing plan. Everything else the planning commission does can be delegated. So, and the city council only has to be involved in changing the law, changing the general plan, changing the zoning map. And so some cities, you know, the subdivisions all come right to the city council. And some cities, the staff just does it, the subdivision process. Now, there are good and bad things about that. The good thing is, if you don't have a group of people, the staff is not interested. If you have a larger group of people looking at all the details, the assumption is that the other guy will catch that, or the other guy must have seen that. I remember I'm the city attorney for Providence. I was, and they send me these subdivision plats that I have to sign. I don't know why, but I don't want to go through and read all the minutes and charge them for the time. And I go, oh, yeah, okay, cool. And yet my assumption is it complies because the city engineer has been through that better than I would. Anyway, confession there. But it's, you know, you have the opportunity to rethink a lot of how these things are done, because the danger is that if we get mired down on these, if because of the growth and the pressure, we are really churning in this process, then we miss the chance to step up another notch higher and look at the big picture and look at where the train's running, because we're in charge of greasing the wheels. Just thought, I don't know, there are opportunity there. I don't know enough about North Ogden to even hazard a suggestion as to where that fits. But
Mayor and I have had conversations, I'm sure you've had it with everybody, that we're trying to preserve quality of life here. And if we get, and if they're just coming in like a little subdivision here and a little subdivision there, and you know, and eventually it's like, you know, pretty soon you're talking about a lot of people. And we gotta make sure that we have the infrastructure so that the roads can handle them, and that the sewer system can handle them, and the stormwater can handle them, and that we have parks for people to go and not, just get mad at each other because they're too piped in together. And it's hard to see when they come like a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
We're like, well,
Well, you have a
so wants to put in
recession.
it's townhomes here. Well, it's like, okay, well, that's just a few townhomes. It's like, wait.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
like,
you've
well,
seen
we
the
did
best
that
and the
already,
worst.
right? Yeah.
13 years ago, the road fell apart and all of a sudden building inspectors are going, And now the opposite. Mary, you were going to comment?
Well, it's interesting. I used to be in the mortgage banking business in the mid-80s, early to mid-80s. And
A lot better than the
people were
early
mailing
80s.
their keys in, right?
Yeah.
House prices went in half in Colorado. But, unfair to our planning staff, a lot of people complain that North Ogden is hard to work with. I think it's because we have so many points of contact, and I wanted to not go to the wild west, but, I don't know why our planning commission, our planning group can't approve like landscape plans or make changes in those. I'm one to kind of do things right, but do it quick. And so if I understood you right, that's not a problem.
Well, it's not a legal problem, and it may be a political benefit, partly because the anecdotes that got us where we are in the last legislative session. I mean, where do you think the idea of private building inspectors came from?
Brad Wilson.
Some anecdote from some cities.
I mean, it's something like a landscape plan. The value of having a planning commission review it is it gives a public forum for it, right? And if it's gonna be done on the planning director's desk, then that opportunity to debate it
Absolutely.
really isn't there. But I mean, how many times have we really seen a landscape plan be debated, right? So I'd be in favor of that. Now subdivisions and, the bigger things, probably absolutely not, but landscape plan, I don't know.
I think you're right, Chris. Kind of the substance of it. I can't remember in the year and a half I've been here and watched the planning commission whether there's been any debate about a landscape plan.
Well, and when you have things like that mixed in, they're a bit of a distraction. They almost create a landscape plan is equal to a, subdivision rezone, which isn't true. They have a different, potentially.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, let's say you're the planning director and the landscape plan comes in, it's garbage, right? I think it would be harder for me as one guy to say, no, this isn't gonna work. And you get in this fight with the resident, where if it comes before a body, it's probably easier for the body like to look and go, oh, hey, 5 people think this is garbage. Right? You know what I mean? Like there's power in numbers. So when it's a snapped approval, then we're thinking that way because most of them are. Yeah, it probably can come there, but if it's absolute.
Yeah, if you're doing a big situation like on the Hill of Mary launch, you'd want the planning commission, but the one that sticks in my mind is the O'Reilly building. The landscaper guy shows up, he says, if you follow this plan, this is gonna die because it doesn't get adequate sunlight. It took like, how long? Get it back to the planning commission. Too long. Those kind of things are what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
pretty much, Brandon.
No, I'm all about streamlining. I'm just, want to
So
make that
what's on the-
reasonable job for someone, I guess.
What's on the horizon? We just met the land use task force and there was a discussion that the zones should follow the general plan. And if you have the right in the general plan to build, you shouldn't need a rezone. So in other words, the big picture is the only picture in the planning, and the danger of this too, the reason for that too is that there is a lot of negotiation that goes on with a rezone. And you understand that a rezone is a legislative act and a landscape approval is an administrative act. And I don't sense there's an issue with your understanding the distinction here, that you get that after the time you served and the number of, I think of this as a sophisticated group. But the legislature doesn't, the problem is that 20% of the cities don't get that. And so that's what's going on. And that's why staying in constant contact, but also making sure that we spend as much time as we can looking in the long run instead of getting too tied up in the short. One other little story, I heard a prominent advocate of housing in Utah with a substantial amount of authority speak at a conference in Colorado where he was not under a Utah microphone. And he said what we are doing for housing in Utah is called the warm frog. That if you turn the heat up gradually, the frog won't know it's being boiled. But they intend to make housing affordability from the state down a virtual mandate. Whatever they can do, they will continue to do. So they came out with a list of 25 little things that you could do, 25 big things, I'm sure, 25 things you could do, and said, okay, you need to do 5 of them, and then it's 8 of them, and then it's, you know. So the best thing to do is to get ahead of the curve and say, okay, what really can we do so it isn't so disruptive? And since we are basically subject in the American form of government to the legislature, how do we influence them? And then how do we get ahead of them so that what happens here isn't as disruptive as it otherwise might be?
Who protects the consumer in all this? That's one of the big erosions that I see going
Yeah.
on, because obviously the further away from the people government gets, the less responsive it is, right? And the less it really cares. So at the state legislature level, when you have an XYZ Homes who's worked over, you know, a small subdivision, and they no longer can come to the city can't really say or do anything, neither can the county. It's only at the state legislature. What happens to those? I've seen that as really a lot, most of what the city council and what planning commission does is that we're the gorilla in the room that has the wherewithal to take on a builder and say, no, you're not, you know, you can't build that home across somebody else's property line. And we will go after you. We can go after you. And that seems to be being taken away. The protection for the consumer, that buffer is all but being eroded away.
Sure.
So who protects them?
Well, it depends. Let's say you have a great lobby. Let's say
There's
you're a
some great
consumer.
lobbies, but we know who they represent.
Well, I know, but look at this. I once gave a speech on federal regulations. I said, look at the things we have federal regulations for: cell towers, billboards, low income, or not low income, but disabilities, Americans with Disabilities Act, and some of those. And the bottom line is they either have a really great lobby that is dollars, or they have huge public support. So instead of trying to wrestle with how builders accommodate the disabled, they just take a flying leap to the United States Congress and get the whole thing mandated downward. And of course, that's how environmental rules have come. It's not a haphazard mixture of just local jurisdictions trying to decide how to protect the wetlands. The decision was made by those who care the most, those citizens, active groups, that they were going to solve the problem with a very imprecise instrument. And so that you have to look at the problem and decide who's going to represent the citizens in any case. One of the problems you face is there are people whose decisions, your decisions affect, that aren't even here. They're not voters here. They will be next year. Because, I mean, you've allowed some very nice accommodations for people that don't have as much money as large lot single family homes cost. And you provided homes for those folks in the community in ways many other communities have not. But those people didn't ask you to. I mean, the developers came, but behind those developers, of course, are the people who rent or buy. And those are all people that we all, you know, have to keep in mind as we make the decisions. So I don't have a quick answer. The good news is we look out for the people who we're most familiar with. And we believe in the American enterprise system so that when a developer comes in, we know he's got a market or he wouldn't be here, he or she. And so that behind even the developer is somebody who needs a home, as if it were complicated enough. My time's about up, and I appreciate the conversation. So let me switch to the last slide here. So this we talked about. The next one after that. The next slide. This is Steve Covey's 4 quadrants, and you've seen that, I'm sure. I just think it was brilliant when I read it 50 years ago. But he talked about the way you classify different things that you need your attention. There are those that are urgent and very important. And that's a developer standing in front of you needing an answer. The second are things that are important but not urgent. The third quadrant are things that really aren't that important but urgent. And that's what I'm talking about. You might want to think about those might be staff things. Important and urgent. And there is slippage. I don't mean to, there is slippage in that. And people who really want to, you have an idea of how things ought to be, are frustrated by the way things aren't that way when other people do. And then you've got not urgent and not important things, which often take a lot of our time. I really like to play Catan. And it takes a lot of time. I've got an electronic game and dang, that's fun. Anyway, because I win because I set the rules. It gives me a little kick.
We can't play that in our house.
I can't play with other people. They win and it frustrates me. But the thing is, we need to focus on quadrant 2. What is it that's not urgent, but very, very important that we need to be doing? The other thing I wanted to mention, and just maybe 5 minutes, and I wanted to talk a little bit in line of the Open Meetings Act and the open records. We talk about who represents the citizens, and they can be so pesky. I mean, sometimes it's just so frustrating because people get so frustrated and we get frustrated. One of the major things that I learned early when I was on the city council was get rid of the urgency if you can. In other words, don't make a decision the same night as the hearing on the most, you guys know this already, because one of the best planning commission meetings I ever attended was in one of the smallest jurisdictions I've ever been to. I'll even sing their praises loudly. It's the West, it's the Eastern Summit County Planning Commission, CAMUS. It's not Park City. Well, what's in Summit County that's not Park City? Not, well, more than there used to be, I guess. Anyway, this guy has just come in from his work, which did not require fancy clothes. And he said, he's the chair of the planning commission. He said, developer, here's how this is going to work. You want to propose a subdivision, and this room is full of people who are concerned about what that subdivision is going to look like in the middle of our rural area. But you're vested and your application was filed 15 years ago, and nobody would allow it anymore. So this is the drill. You can make your presentation, and then we're going to hear from everybody who wants to speak on this subject, and speakers ask questions. Developer, you're going to write down every one of these questions, and then we're going to meet again in 2 weeks, and you're going to answer the questions. And then we'll see if there's more questions. They said, we're not going to vote till we finish this process. And I thought, wow. And as the developer's attorney, I was proud of it because I knew where the balls were. I knew how to get my arms around this. And I could participate upfront and open without this sense of impending doom. Because too often we get a situation where we just want this out of the way. It's not going to be pretty anyway, so make a quick kill of it. And I understand that too. But, thoughtful, long-term, these are the things that citizens are entitled to in terms of due process, and particularly landowners. Landowners have a different kind of due process rights because they have a protected interest in their land. That's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and property. So if we're going to incarcerate somebody, they have a right to due process. If we're going to downzone somebody's land, if we're going to deny a rezone, then the person who's the applicant is entitled to notice and what the issues are. And you do this. He has the right to respond to the evidence. In the law, in a court, we call that confront the witness. We don't want to have people confronting witnesses in the planning commission, but to respond. So we don't have somebody make a comment like, you know, you, the developer declared bankruptcy 3 years ago. What about that? And then the planning commission says, well, we're not going to talk about that. But the developer needs a chance to respond. That came up after the public comment was closed and the developer was told to be quiet. And one of the planning commissioners said, you know, this guy declared bankruptcy. And I'm going, whoa, not my client. But you got to give the guy a chance to respond to that. There's due process rights here. If that colors the way the decision is going to be made. Everyone has a right to an impartial decision maker. And that's why I know you guys have done so much to, I mean, tonight, declaring conflicts of interest and declaring what you, factors that may make it may play a role in your decision that you've heard from other places, other conversations. I mean, we know we try to minimize ex parte conversations when we're doing, you know, issues that require an independent, neutral decision maker, but we at least want to articulate them and talk about them and get it out in the open so everybody knows where we're coming from. The person, the citizen, if you're having a public hearing, but certainly the property owner has the right to be heard, the applicant, on the issues that are before you. And we know, of course, that the public has a right to be heard in some cases. They don't have the right to be heard on a building permit. And yet, interestingly enough, that's the biggest deal that actually happens. That's when the dirt's turned. Why is that? Well, I don't know how to rationalize it. It's just that that's how it's always been. Nobody expects to be heard. But that's when it really, when the rubber hits the road, the shovel hits the dirt. So these rules are a little artificial, but what we do know is every citizen doesn't have the right to be heard in every meeting, and there's nothing wrong with that. We just provide a reasonable way for them to be heard. And the internet has provided opportunities for chat comments and email communications and things like that, that I really think go a long ways toward helping people with due process. They have a right to a decision based on the evidence. Recent legal decisions in Utah are changing the way we think of substantial evidence. So the legislature's in there too. So the basis for our decisions must be recorded on the record, and the evidence and the reasons for sorting out the evidence. We have a lot of discretion in local government. We just have to leave a clear trail of what the process was that we arrive at a decision. So there's written findings. The Utah Supreme Court chucked a case back to the Planning Commission in Moab and said, we can't make heads or tails out of why you did what you did. They also said, by the way, we don't know how you can deny this, even though you did, but if you've got a reason, you better give it to us. And that case frustrated me because I thought, oh my gosh, now they go back and start over and go through the Planning Commission again from the very beginning. But the court, I think, was trying to send a message to everyone in the state saying, look, it doesn't do any good. The case was somebody wanted to do overnight rentals in a single family zone. That was a conditional use and allowed in the zone. And the Planning Commission and City Council turned them down. And there was no basis for that. There was nothing in the law that said you had the discretion. You could modify the permit and put reasonable conditions on it, but you can't deny the permit when it's specifically stated in the zoning ordinance that it's appropriate for the zone. But anyway, the message is the Supreme Court has now asked us to be even more transparent and open and clear about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And I hear the stories all over, but I don't hear them about North Ogden. In fact, I'm preaching to the choir, but for what it's worth, congratulations on how well you do things here. Any comments or questions before I surrender my control over the meeting at this point? Yes.
Okay, just one more plug. We sent you an email this afternoon. It's the first 2 of 4 sections of the code reorganization. It's not a rewrite, but it's titles 11 and 12, zoning and subdivision. And those are perfectly couched in not urgent. We can take time on this, but extremely important. And the first conversation that we have about this in 2 weeks will be not a notice of public hearing, just a work session. We're going to create a website and blast that out on Facebook, give the public plenty of opportunity to come and ask questions. I'm looking for about a month before we even post the first public hearing notice. And that is where, those public conversations about landscape plans should happen in your code. So it should happen in public, meetings or meetings that are well announced to the public so they can come and participate in those conversations. And then we create ordinances that we can administer as a staff or as a planning commission with decisions that the public had a chance to weigh in on. So I just urge you to open those and take a look. And if you have any questions, invite you to call us.
That's it. Thank you. Appreciate your
Thank
courtesy.
you, Greg.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming.
Sure.
All right, bye. We'll talk just a little bit about streetscape measures.
Come over here if that's okay.
Thanks, Greg.
So this is a continuation of the Washington Boulevard Streetscape program that we worked on about 2 years ago. The Planning Commission they've spent a lot of time doing, going on a field trip, and we've done a lot of, narrowing down the options essentially. So one of the important topics to understand is induced demand. We're talking about Mountain Road and Monroe Boulevard. Monroe Boulevard, the city's already purchased the right of way for that. So the city's inducing demand by doing that. And currently Mountain Road, there's a number of subdivisions that are proposed up in that region. So as this happens, the demand will be induced. If we go down to, let's just get right into the slides. So what I'm hoping to take away from today's conversation or discussion is mostly for Monroe Boulevard, we've talked about bulb outs and planted medians along Mountain Road, and then street trees or other vertical elements such as street lights. Those are kind of the 3 or 4 issues I'd like to get some detail and direction on by the end of today. So this is Monroe Boulevard. We have the existing conditions here. There's no striping on it. Actually, it's pretty much just a wide swath of asphalt with 4-foot sidewalks on either side. So this is what the Planning Commission has worked on, and this is kind of reflects staff recommendation as well as the Planning Commission's preferred options with 10-foot travel or 11-foot travel lanes, 10-foot travel turn lane, and 5-foot bike lanes and parking on each side. The trail is would be the west side, and with a 5-foot sidewalk running down the east side. And then one of the, go down to the next slide, Katie. One thing that we wanted to talk about as far as traffic calming on Monroe was bulb outs. So these provide benefits, but there's also some cons to them as well. So they slow in the calm traffic. They shorten the distance that the pedestrians are in the intersection. You can see that this diagram shows the improved visibility by both pedestrians, cyclists, and people driving cars. Problems with these is it eliminates the dedicated right turn lane. So as cars are traveling and turning right, they'll need to slow down, and any vehicles behind them essentially will have to either slow down to their speed or rear end them. And then it requires, like, fire trucks specifically need to navigate these things. So there's a little bit of more research that needs to be done in that, but this is one of those decisions that's not necessarily urgent, but is important.
And Ty,
Yes.
just real quick on those. Pleasantview is doing a subdivision with a bulb out in it. It's almost approved and will be under construction here real soon.
Okay.
It's also, one of the other things with the bulb out is it helps with LID. It's one of the things that they put their art boxes on. Did I say that correct? Their retention bait box underneath, and they dump water in. So, but the fire district did sign off on that one. It is, but it does narrow up their intersection a lot. So if we want to see one here soon. Yeah.
Let's see how it works.
Well, we can see what they've
Yes.
done. So this is the trees and sparks strategy. This is essentially the direction we've gotten from the planning commission. It's kind of what we want to stick with so far, unless we want to do more formalized street trees with specific standards, specific species, anything like that. This is currently what we're at right there in that regard. So this is a point of discussion for later. Okay, so for Mountain Road, this is a kind of an engineering showing some options. This drawing will be more similar to what we'll have in the public works standards. This shows a potential for a landscaped median with the LID. And then on the other would be the south and east side of the road as it comes around the mountain with an LID swell on that side of the road. Good into the next slide, Katie.
Well, how did you get to this point in the mountain road? I didn't think we had anything firm at this point.
This is the existing conditions, and this is kind of a workup of what we've talked about so far. This is Lauren's option that he drew up, and this is what would it look like with the trail meandering. And then this is what we've come up with as far as the this is the staff recommendation, and this is with planning commission's input on what we wanted to do. with
Okay,
my understanding.
I'm of the opinion, I don't think you had enough direction from the planning commission to really have our input. I didn't think.
Okay.
If anyone agrees or disagrees with that. So in my opinion, and I could have seen this totally wrong, but we were still up in the air with the trees down the median, and I didn't think we had given you enough to go on.
Right, and trees down the median is the kind of the main issue that we're
Or if there would
discussing.
be a median.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're discussing tonight. That was
Okay.
hoping to get some direction on that.
I'm not looking to beat you up on this at all, but I was like, I didn't think we had given you enough to go on, so I was a little surprised to see this.
Yeah,
It's a possible.
Can you hear me? I agree with Brandon. We didn't give you a lot of information on that to come up with any type of real design for it. There was a lot of discussion and no real direction for it. So I was kind of shocked to see this.
Well, I think it's fine that staff has a recommendation.
okay, yeah, and this,
So I don't want to table this by any means. I just want that stated that I don't think we had given you guys a clear, hey, this is what we want to see in a work session or anything like that.
and fair enough.
Because, okay, so if I may, so there's a little bit of a, and I'll try to represent Eric's view on this as well. So I've been kind of beating the drum, hey, Mountain Road is the crown jewel of North Ogden, or will be, could be, right? And it needs to have all these features, right? And I feel like I'm a kid in a candy store just wanting it all in there. Okay, and Eric is of the opinion that, hey, we've got 80 feet and we need to make that work, and we're not gonna go out to 90 feet, and you've got this much territory. So whatever you want to put in that is fine, but we're gonna have a trail and a planted median and everything. And I was more wanting to see, well, what would it take to make this thing be awesome? And the reason why, and Eric's not here to express his viewpoint, but I tried there, is I just don't see another swath of land where we have an open canvas, just a blank canvas to just design like we have for the north part of Mountain Road, right? And I think that the way that's gonna influence the development around it and everything, I just would really like to see something cool there. So that's my soapbox on that. So,
Can you expand on how you think that would influence the development?
yeah, I do. I think, I mean, if that road is utilitarian, I think it lends itself to utilitarian type development, right? Like if it's there's just a feel when you drive down, right? And we toured Skyline Boulevard in South Ogden, right? And there's just this feel of like, hey, I want to put $1 million homes here. And I'm not saying we need $1 million homes up there, but I think if we put $1 million home road in there, we're gonna get $1 million homes. We're gonna get
Because
stuff like that.
the developers I've talked to right now with the subdivisions that include there, because of the traffic, they're planning on building less expensive homes. Their lot prices are less
Mhm.
because they don't think people are going to want to live on a busy road. Right?
Mhm.
And we approved some subdivisions along there already. John, but
We've approved one that it's over in the corner. So it has 4 lots that surround it, but it's not a long stretch. It's just one intersection.
But that, to Brad's point, that one intersection, you know, you don't have a nice, beautiful road, then come to
Yeah.
4 homes that are sitting on there that.
I have another thought.
I may have misinterpreted, we had a fairly robust discussion about this because last meeting we had a little lighter agenda. And we were able to discuss this and we did get some input from the developer that was there that night, who has a development that we were discussing in this area and also owns, and will be doing subsequent developments. Yes. And correct me if I misunderstood what he said, but he seemed open to the idea of, hey, he may have even gone as far to say, we'd love to have a nice road there because we do think it will attract a different type of home buyer. But maybe I misunderstood what he said. He seemed very open to the idea of a,
Yeah, when I listened to the discussion, he said, hey, whatever you guys want to do,
yeah.
that's up to you. So, John, I think, didn't you look at some, just to throw this out, so since this is kind of just a discussion,
Sure.
didn't you look at what it would cost to do the difference?
Yeah, Lauren put together a cost estimate. It was about, for the length of the road, about $200,000 is asphalt, and I think $690 for a planted median. And typically the city pays for the middle portion, so we would pay for the asphalt or the planted median. But that, granted, that's a 2.5 mile stretch, Lauren.
I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
just so we
sure.
have information to be thinking about.
Certainly, I mean, cost is a factor. I've been batting this idea around, I pitched it lightly a few times that, and I'm not married to it, okay? I'm just throwing stuff on the wall at this point, right? But, you know, maybe this is a road that doesn't have fronted homes up in the section. It's more like a parkway, okay? And there's pullouts into it. So it's a beautiful parkway, you're driving down or running down, and you're not running through people's front yards, like a typical North Ogden subdivision. If you've driven Anthem Parkway in Henderson, Nevada, something like that, you've got parkways that have cars and runners and joggers and strollers and people's backyards. There's an offset, and maybe this is that type of road. And so I would agree that, okay, if we put a big wide road on there, no matter how beautiful it is, we probably don't want $1 million homes right on a busy road. I mean, people don't want that. But think about homes that are at the backyard is that road, you know, and with a berm of trees or something, right? So I'm thinking of something different maybe here that we've had in the past. And that's why I don't think you had enough input to really go, hey, this is what we want.
In addition to that, even the median itself, you know, there was some discussion at our planning commission meeting of when the trees die, the cost of maintaining the trees, our beautiful mountains. And, you know, would we put things like, you know, rocks and lights and things like that in there versus, you know, only having landscaped elements with grass, and there was some water sensitivity comments. You know, so I think it merits some further discussion because of that.
So if I could clarify one thing, I think I'm being fair to the developer. When in this position of wrapping whatever we want within the approved right of way, which is 80 feet. So there's options within that 80 feet. There, and earlier in the discussion, there was consideration to extend the right of way to something wider than 80 feet, possibly 90. The point being that the developer, as I understood this position, he was okay with any design option that fit within that 80 foot right.
I think that's fair, but he's not all of our road.
Right, I'm just
I mean,
saying.
He's a
But
small
that
part.
subdivision, that's true, but I'm saying that subdivision is approved, does have that improvement within that, for that 80 foot right.
So I
Just a comment.
apologize for
No,
not.
you don't need to. No, I'm
And-
So what,
I'm not a real fan of the medium anyway, because I don't think we need to have that road look really neat. It can be done by development along the side of the road with the bike paths, the walking paths, people choosing what type of trees to put in the park strip. It can be really neat without the medium.
Well, we're just having an open discussion, just sharing ideas. Absolutely.
Like I said, I'm not married to that backyard thing, right? But I think, trying to think out of the box here.
And one of the concerns, it seems like when I was listening to it, I've been on that road, it looks very nice, but try to get in your driveway.
Well, what I imagine is every half mile, there's a intersecting road, you go back to a subdivision back there. There aren't homes that front it, you know. Instead, you've got a rock wall or whatever, and a road.
That's what you'd have to do.
Yeah, and there's a give and take to that. Like I said, I'm not saying this is what we need, but it's something I think we should think about.
What was the name of that street?
Henderson? When we turn to Skyline Drive in South Ogden, I think it's called Anthem Park. There's a bunch of them down.
Take a road trip.
There's some areas down in
I'm just kinda curious if
southwest
there's
Jordan
any
as
pictures
well that have the same concept where you have their feeder roads or the homes are backed to it.
I don't think we have the population to justify that.
Probably don't today.
You've got, I mean, in Idaho Falls, you've got a road, Sunnyside Road has, a situation like that. So you have setups like that in small communities and large communities, and they typically tend to end up having nicer developments in those areas when you have a setup like you were describing.
Let's see what Guy has to share with us.
So this cross section here basically meets the minimum for everybody, for all users, that is to say, for automobiles, cyclists, and pedestrians. That's the 6-foot sidewalk or the 6-foot trail along the east and north side of the road. This is an asphalt trail, and with this configuration, it doesn't really provide much for land use. You can't really see the homes because they're typically 30 feet set back off the property line or the sidewalk. Whereas if you were to put homes backing onto it and change the land use adjacent to this, or the structure of the land use of how it's used, would be one way to do that. So if we can scroll down, you can see it and what a potential landscape median may look like. So here we have Lauren's comment, 10-foot white is 3 times the cost to install as compared to just regular asphalt, as John was saying earlier. So that's what we have as far as that goes. And I think that is, everything is, and then here we have kind of some examples of where these islands, if we decide to have them, would potentially fall within this mountain road.
Those are pretty well the intersections as they exist or proposed on various subdivisions.
Yeah, for a sense of scale, this is the divide road and this is 450. Is that correct, Lauren?
That is, no, that's not 450, that's Pleasant View.
Oh, Pleasant View. Okay. So it's all the way to Pleasant View. Then. Okay.
What's the distance on that?
That's not scale.
2.5 miles south.
I think so, yeah.
And then I think, so this is the direction that we have as far as discussion. This is kind of just the trees in the park strip following what the city recommends. Is Mountain Road appropriate for street lights? Current standard, we have street lights 600 feet on center. Is that correct, Lauren? And then, so that would just be standard. Or do we want to consider decorative street lights such as Monroe, Washington? That's the questions for discussion. Any questions for me?
We sure we want to have the Cretaceous lavigata tree as one of the approved trees? I'm kidding.
I'm surprised you were able to pronounce that correctly, Council. Discussion?
Well, does the city have an appetite for maintaining? I mean, if we did a center burn and planted stuff, there's a cost for the development, and then there's an ongoing cost to maintain it, right? It's not free, and it's not lost on me. And we don't know if the city really has an appetite to.
I heard you were gonna maintain it. if we did.
My Boy Scout troop would have been happy to pitch in on.
You know, we did have a discussion about that xeriscape. Because the city, I think, has to send the message to the citizens in regards to water. Councilman Barker's been talking to me about, setting the example with the watering in the parks, with what's going on. And fortunately, our forefathers, did a lot with water on the assumption that water flows as it normally does. We're not seeing that this year for sure, but that's another thing I think we have is what if we do have that, what do we do with it? We want it to have the least use of water with the least amount of upkeep. We want it to be beautiful once we put it in there, if that's the decision, but a lot of things along those lines. Councilmember Stoker, did you have a comment?
I do. When all of this first started on treescape, I've been a big opponent. I'm not for trees. I think they get overgrown. You can't see. We have sight problems. And perfect example down at Walker Theater. When they first came in, they had a small sign. And the complaint was you couldn't see the sign. So it was amended to where they could get their bigger sign. I can't see their sign. There's a tree. So you can't see through the tree. And there are some developments that have been done with xeriscape, with big rocks, with different colored rocks, and small shrubbery that probably are more drought resistant. And they really are pretty and attractive looking. And if you drive around our city, some of the residents are even taking out lawn and just having small patches of lawn and doing xeriscape around. And they really are attractive. And even those bigger $1,000,000+ dollar homes are doing in other areas where there is desert xeriscapes.
So if this road turns into what I want it to turn into, there'd be no need for signage wouldn't be a problem. I don't envision this as anything that would have any.
Well, I'm not talking about a signage. I'm giving the example of there's a tree and you can't see.
Okay.
And trees require water and they're messy.
I think there's the bigger question too, that you brought up, I think, is cost to maintain it. I mean, we look at as soon as you said that, I'm thinking, okay, look at the uproar that we have at maintaining beautiful flowers up and down Washington Boulevard. And maintaining this will dwarf that out of the city coffers every year. What's the appetite going to be for that kind of expenditure, especially when you look at the city as a whole? It only exists in one place, right? There'll be some citizens that will say it's those folks up on the hill. They've got a special road and we all have to pay for it. You can hear the different kinds of responses that we'll get. I don't think there's an appetite to pay for, as beautiful as it is and as much as I would personally like it. I don't think there's an appetite. That's going to be an expensive enterprise to keep trimmed and weed free, and all the sprinklers that'll get broken, the freezing I just don't see an appetite for that kind of expenditure, and the cost, three or more times the cost to put it in to begin with.
I can't believe I'm rebutting all this stuff. So no, I'm not really trying to argue. I guess so. But if the road turned into what I wanted it to, it would provide value to the community, not just the homeowners, because I would see this as a place where there'd be a parking lot nearby. Because people are doing that. They drive to a trail and they go run.
Sure.
Moms get out and they want to jog along this because of the view and the tree line, and we're all gonna have different opinions on this. And I understand the water and the monetary concerns. That's not lost on me, but I think there's a place.
What about plowing? I mean, I just thinking about, but Lauren, you've been kind of raising your hand for a while.
Mention a little bit about the water. The majority of Mountain Road up there is beyond the surface of Pineview water. It's most likely Marriott's water system, unless we use culinary. We don't want to do that. But so we would be at the whims of Marriott's water companies who provide secondary water.
Which is becoming very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So maybe backing up just a little bit so that you're not rebutting every.
I'm not trying to. I think it's in my nature.
Kind of always has been.
It's not you, Brian.
But it seems to me that everyone agrees that it's an open swath of land with great opportunity to build something interesting. And that it seems all the comments, even in the things that people aren't saying, I think people want to create something beautiful. But the debate is coming down to what does beautiful look like? What does beautiful cost? But if I'm not mistaken, and I could be mistaken, that at least those 2 points are a starting point of we've got an opportunity with something open
Yeah, I
and we
think
want to
we
create
want to make
something
it
neat.
something
Yeah, well-
unique. I call it something unique because it is once in a lifetime situation. I think Kai asked about lights, any input on lights? I think the lights are very nice. I just think we have too many of them. Along Washington Boulevard.
Yeah,
I'm a dark sky guy for sure. I think we have too many lights all over the city.
I don't think
I think we
so.
have too many lights in the
I don't know.
backyards.
Don't have enough on Mountain Road, that's for
No, I'm
sure.
talking about Washington Boulevard.
I know, I think Washington's great.
I like the dark sky thing, especially with our mountains up
Yeah,
there.
I'd like to see floodlights get out of people's driveways, and all sorts of things that you guys are gonna like.
Yeah, make it easier for the burglars.
Yeah.
I think we
vandals.
concluded that
Mhm.
we'd like to make it something unique. It's just how we do that.
Yeah.
Within, I think Councilman Swanson brought up some major issues.
And is there a way that we can incorporate the LID down the center of the street? That's something really, you look at some of the desert communities where I grew up, and you don't have water flowing all the time, but you do have, these, they're basically rock washes that they're attractive. It's better than just pavement. It doesn't take a lot of maintenance to them. A little weed killer once in a while.
Cross sections that was shown up there had the option in the median that could be used for LID.
Uh-huh.
And also the lower side park strip could be used for LID also.
That might be something that provides some kind of function to it other than just beautification. It gives us some beautification, but it gives us a more of a functional use.
Well, on the beauty part, when it's dark in some of those southwestern communities, they have some pretty well-placed lower lights. They might be black, they might be something this tall that has a downlight, but they really too look beautiful when you kind of highlight some of those rocks or a little shrub or something like that. They're, at least in the Southwest, when they put some lighting on that, it's pretty attractive when it's dark.
I think there's ways that we can make it unique.
Yeah, I think we ought to be thinking about that. I think we're all in agreement that we ought to. not
I
just think
disclosed
about
at the first of the meeting, I'm pie in the sky here, and Eric is the practical. Okay, so. take that
Well, I
for-
think in January that we need to have a field trip down to the boulders in Scottsdale and see, some streetscaping down there.
January, February, March, I go any of those months.
it. Ron, you had a comment.
I've been kind of the champion of at least introducing the idea here. And it goes clear back to my experience with, I talked to Bill and Greg Montgomery, who's the planning director for Ogden City. And I asked them about the maintenance side of it. And the way that they've structured the landscaping there and what have you, it's pretty minimal. It's not like parks that require mowing every week and what have you. He said at the most, it's like once or twice a year, parks people go and take care of some weeds and what have you. So the planning idea is really a crucial decision, part of your deliberation. Since you want to take a hard look at doing a minimal amount of landscaping, what have you, but by the same token, it's one of those things that I really feel that as a city, it's hopefully don't look back and say, gee, we had a missed opportunity there.
We just need a BDO.
So how did you run over the measurements that you have kind of come up with? Did you say the median was going to be 10 feet wide?
Yes.
So what if you, maybe this isn't a thing, but what if you made it 4 or 5 feet wide and just did like rock scaping, and you could do different patterns, people will do like grade,
Yeah.
like snaking patterns, and even like Cheryl was saying, like the really, you put cat dye in there for that matter, and then gave another trail or bike trail on the other side of the road instead of on one side. Unless I'm not remembering what you said, right?
No, that's
Because
an
there's
option.
like, I think isn't it like trail road, median road, sidewalk?
Go back to it.
Yeah, let's go back to page 9 of the agenda.
Those drawings are like slightly confusing to me, but
Now, why don't you walk through kind of one side, just because it is hard on that scale, especially the words get cut off. So just walking from. Yeah, that's a great comment.
Okay.
So we started with a 5-foot sidewalk, and this drawing actually shows it extending into the public utility easement 1 foot. Then there's a 6.5-foot swale, 8.5 feet of parking, including the curb, 4-foot bike lane, 12-foot travel lane, a 10-foot landscape meeting or LID swale, 12-foot travel lane, 4-foot bike lane, 8.5 feet of parking, and then with the meandering trail, the park strip would vary from 2.5 to 4 feet, 4.5 feet.
Skyline doesn't have parking on it, does it, apparently?
I don't think so. I couldn't.
I mean, that's, to me, if that's gonna be a unique street, I'm not sure parking makes a lot of sense on the street.
Maybe parking.
Well, you look at the, Skyline Drive, as I recall, there's no.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if there's
There's
houses that
some here
are.
and there.
funding
That's
us
right.
to-
It wasn't on every block. It was never- yeah.
Because most people want parking in front of their house.
Just do it like
It's
Brandon
gonna
says,
be close.
there's no frontage to it, so it can't be like in front of anybody's house. They can pull down in.
And I don't know if that it is gonna fly, but something, I really like it, I think, the more I think about it. We'd have to think of something different. Right now, it doesn't fit our ordinance. They'd make it double fronted lot. Which violates our ordinance. So I
I've been in a lot of parkways that are like that.
don't want to see that all over the city. When you go to Vegas and everything is a road and there's subdivisions hidden behind a wall, that feels like you're going through a prison, but there's a couple roads down there that really have a lot of character and
Talk about Las Vegas Boulevard.
I'm talking the seedier parts of Las Vegas.
Road has a lot of character.
Guy, what else did you from us, Council Barker? You had a comment, I think.
First, I'm not a bit avid walker, so, or on trails and sidewalks, I don't understand the difference between a 5-foot sidewalk and a 6-foot trail. You walk on both of them, what does it matter?
Well, it's one, can you get one or two people? Can you walk shoulder to shoulder on a 4-foot
Whose
sidewalk?
shoulders? Yours or
Yeah,
Cheryl's?
Maybe that's.
Well, I mean, that's just.
Well, Cheryl could probably speak to that. You do a lot of running, right? And you probably run with someone. When you're on a 4-foot sidewalk, you're,
But that's 5
right,
feet.
right. 5 doesn't really give you a
5 to
lot.
6, it's semantics, I think. And then we were talking the median down the road. In my meetings that I've had with Public Works, whatever, it's double the amount of curb and gutter that snow plows hit. They don't like. And I mean, Laura price,
Yeah.
and it's double the amount of costs and repairs and just one more thing to think about. I'm with, I guess with Eric. He's a common sense and I'm a minimalist.
If it's an LID kind of thing, you just push the snow into the middle, and it'll melt and drain there.
I don't think I've represented Eric well if you think he doesn't
No.
want anything nice.
No, I didn't say. I said common sense.
But seriously, I think he,
Even though you didn't say that, that's what we're
I
gonna.
know. Eric is very much a fan of, look, you've got 80 feet, whatever you put in it is
Right.
fine, okay? But like, don't be encroaching into 90 feet and
No.
taking people's
Oh, I
property.
agree with that.
Or buying, okay, that's, unless you buy it, okay? And I don't sense an appetite for that here, okay? So,
Captain Barker, so on the trails thing, and I've had a few years of active transportation planning. 6 foot even is just bare minimum for the width of a multi-use trail. And 10 feet anymore for any highly used active transportation route is wide enough that you can get a mom on a stroller and maybe a bike past them and maybe a walker coming the other direction. And so 6 feet is pretty minimal. And typically the thing that will differentiate a trail from a sidewalk is the asphalt surface being smooth. So it's an asphalt surface or a continuous concrete with like a saw cut as opposed to a trowel cut piece every 4 feet. And the reason for that is thinking about somebody out on speed skates, which you might not think about, but somebody used a legacy trail and West Davis corridor. It was an Olympic speed skater who lived in Summit County. They'd come out and ride that 14 miles of continuous asphalt on their speed skates to train during the summer. So just a few kind of considerations. And so if you were going to do anything, it would be like eliminating parking. If you don't want parking on that road, to give more space to a multi-use trail would probably be a greater utility in some ways than, or you could eliminate some park strip if you're concerned about park strip, but then you're like curb and back of curb being the trail. So it depends on the road speeds. But Yeah, 6 feet. And if you want an example, 6-foot trail versus a 10-foot, the oldest section of the Ogden River Parkway from Dinosaur Park out to like 21st Street and Fort Buenaventura, there are sections there that are 6 feet, and they're really, really narrow. And then you get out onto Weaver Parkway or Weaver River Trail or any of the new trail west that connects the Denver Rio Grande Rail Trail is all 10 feet wide. And then sections down in Utah County of more modern trail, I guess, are going up pushing 14 feet wide now.
And I guess that's why I said, I'm not an avid walker on city stuff, because sidewalk and asphalt is the same.
So one thing I'd like to point out, I say frequently in the planning commission meetings is if you look at the rise of these electronic vehicles that people have, like the scooters and the hoverboards and everything, that's only going to increase in my opinion in the future, right? Like kids are going to get to their friend's house on these things. And I feel like we need to have pedestrian corridors that are big enough to handle those. So 2 kids on hoverboards can save the
But
crowds.
by then there won't be moved.
Well, that'd be great.
Perfect, less for us to maintain.
Kai, what else is on your mind? Give us some things to think about. I'm not sure you're gonna get any answers tonight.
Okay, well, if,
Generate some thought process.
with the making it unique, that would be helpful. We'll see what we can come up for some unique ideas as staff, but this is, I wanted to talk about this recommendation. This actually eliminates the 12-foot lanes and reduces them down to 11 feet and giving that extra foot in the bike lanes. If we do want to eliminate on-street parking, that does open up to wider trail. Is that something that you guys have a flavor for?
I mean, if you're on a unique street, I don't care how you landscape, but if you've got cars parked along the side.
I don't know how you sell a house though without parking in front of it.
If you have frontage, you have to have
We
parking.
just did it to 2,600.
I know, but that was after it was already built. That would be, I think you'll have a harder time selling a home if you don't have parking in front.
Well, I guess the question is are we interested in selling homes or having a unique road?
Plus, you don't know what the future is gonna be. You know, maybe 5, 10 years, maybe not even that long, on-street parking will not be a big thing. It's not gonna be, it won't be the trend, more or less.
So Kai, are there 2 bike lanes or 1?
One on each side of the road.
Okay.
My crystal ball's broken.
Well, Cheryl, I agree with that point. And when we talk about parking lots and stuff, I've been also an advocate of, we need load unload zones for things like ride sharing and stuff in the city that would offset some parking. Now, whether that's on street parking or just parking stalls, I think that's a trend that's coming. And I think there's value in that. You know, there are people that aren't going to survive in this town without a car. We haven't been able to do that really, but with Uber and stuff, I think we need some load unload zones in high, in parking lots and things like that. Parks.
I mean, I work with somebody in Farmington who lives here in North Ogden. He hit me up the other day and said, "Hey, you thought about riding the train to Farmington Station?" I said, "No." I saw him today. He's our IT guy. He had a skateboard under his desk and he said, "Yeah, I'm loving it." So it's happening in our community that people are going down, even though they closed Pleasant View Station, they're going down to 25th Street, they're leaving their car, they're getting on Front Runner and they're going. So it's happening.
But I'm saying let's say we eliminate on-street parking on this road, maybe there still needs to be a place where we pull it and it's a 15-minute load unload and it's, 25 feet long or something. Because people are still gonna need to, the pizza delivery guy needs to pull in and maybe drop something off or something like that. So.
What do they call those things?
You're good.
A drone? No, I'll be kidding. Just a light drone. What else, Kai?
Well, if using this cross section, any other options want me to bring back using this as kind of a foundation or a base? That can make edits to or changes to? Again, this cross section meets the bare minimum for all of the users, and that's kind of where I think staff is at, is trying to do that.
I'll send you an email with some ideas.
Can it be unique if it meets the minimum? In your opinion?
I think the
Because
medium
it
has to be
almost just
looked at.
becomes another road if we're just meeting the minimums.
It was mentioned that the houses may not have
What's
to
that?
face the street, that these could be the backyards. Is that something that we'd want to throw at them?
I feel like that would take a fundamental rewrite of some
Yeah.
things. But I think it's 30, 50.
Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause I don't think we're set up for that. So this is one of those things, do we stop and breathe and think about that before we move on with this? Right? Or do we?
What other developments, John, are coming along on the horizon? Because it's gonna be timing of.
Yeah,
when we
sure.
come to development.
There's one between North Oaks Cove and the Cove that we anticipate coming in the near future. It'll pick up a little bit of this roadway.
We have one that's coming to the planning commission after it gets through TRC shortly. Right next to Cecil's project. But of this 2.5 miles of road, about a third of it is already developed. So 2/3 is this undeveloped land.
So I've been pretty loud tonight. I just want you guys to know I'm a pretty good loser. Like, I don't always get what I want. I'm married, for example. And, like this isn't.
You're saying she's not what you want?
I don't always get what I want, and I'm okay with that, okay, but I'm gonna express my viewpoint, and, I think that would be clear.
We appreciate that. Yeah, no problem. Okay, Kai, thank you very much. We move on to the next item here. Brandon's gonna talk to us about housing types.
So the purpose of this brief presentation is to just kind of give a refresher on possibilities for different housing types inside the city, particularly those that might be compatible with surrounding single-family residential development. This is our current future land use map. As everyone knows, this is in the process of being revised. It's not yet quite complete as far as the general plan advisory committee's recommendations. So and that is, we're working on finalizing that. You can go to the next slide then. So just kind of lighten things up a little bit. There's a full range and spectrum of housing. At the very far end of size and quality of housing is, you could say, the Palace at Versailles. Details about this is has about 2,300 rooms inside of the Palace of Versailles, and the building itself is one source quoted at 63,154 square meters. And that translates into 15.5 acres of floor area inside the building. So that doesn't include the landscape or grounds. So if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. And then on the other end of the spectrum is a trend that's developed maybe over the last 10 years or so is tiny homes. This particular tiny home is on the is actually a trailer on trailer foundation. It's 162 square feet. It does boast a full kitchen though, has a washer, and it has a bedroom loft area, as you can see. And so there's obviously a very wide range of ways to meet the housing need. One thing that I think, one of the points that I like to make and think is important is the issue of dignity. And that dignity isn't something that necessarily is only offered to housing types that are large. And that when that paradigm is understood, it can provide some clarity on how to move forward with providing housing types in a way that meets the needs for housing among a range of economic situations for people. Next slide, please. So one more practical level, this is a new housing type, not a new, but this is called accessory dwelling units. There's several different variations on accessory dwelling units. What is new about accessory dwelling units is the state legislature has recently mandated that basically virtually all residential zones are now accessory dwelling units is a permitted use. There's some exceptions to that, so carve-outs for lots that are under 6,000 square feet, and then cities are allowed to specify a certain proportion of their single-family residential zones that that are not required to do it. It's 25%, but but basically they're a permitted use per the state legislature in this last legislative session. So the three variations of them are internal ADUs, which is just using space in the existing home, attached, which is very similar to an internal. It's just typically in addition to the primary footprint of the home and the way it was originally constructed. And then there's detached. And this, you can see in this example, there's an example of a detached in the rear yard. You've got a smaller building that could serve as an accessory building.
So Brandon, with the new law, we have some pretty specific things on what they could look like, had to look like the house, so to speak, et cetera. Do we have a limit on size? It can only be half the size of a dwelling, or it seems like we had a bunch of, are those still applicable under the new law?
It's my understanding that they are. The new law regulates homes on, well, maybe John should weigh in on that question, because I'm thinking in terms of accessory buildings per se, but the new law applies to single family homes. And there was, I think for a while we were thinking of it was just anything on a residential lot, but my understanding is that we could still apply regulations to a detached accessory unit. If it were attached to the home, I don't think we could, because it applies to a single family home, would be the same structure, same building. So
it would seem like the substance of it would be the legislature is trying to get affordable type of housing. And when you put all those restrictions on what it's got to look like, what it can, but I appreciate John weighing in.
yeah, the main thrust behind that was that my understanding is that the legislature saw that there is a potential field or supply of affordable housing that's right under our noses, and this is a way that the entire state could help take a chip off of that issue, without causing problems with sewer service capacity or water or other things. There are some requirements that the cities can impose, which is that, and the city a couple of years ago already, or I guess it was 2020, I believe, that we already passed this. So much of the state requirements were already, we were ahead of the game. But that you can require an additional parking space, and you can exclude lots that are under 6,000 square feet. But cities basically already addressed this potential building type. So that's accessory dwelling units. And then this is an example. Actually, this is in Ogden. You can see that the main home is actually in the background with this small detached accessory dwelling unit in the foreground. It faces the sidewalk on around the corner from the main home. And so that's one example of that. That's a rather small example, but that's one relatively close by. The next type of building type is a townhouse or row house. Sometimes people just use different names in different parts of the country, but typically one distinction between a town home and a row house is that row houses, more commonly when they're called row houses, they actually have a backyard, and townhomes tend not to. So a townhome is typically a slightly more urban situation where the parking would be directly behind the building without a landscaped area. Townhomes tend to occur on lots that are somewhere around 2,000 to 4,000 square feet, depending on how much yard space there is, and if there's a detached garage or something or other structure. And then the next slide, please. This is another example of a townhome configuration. This one has a front porch, and then you can go ahead and click on the next. These are actually from here in North Ogden. This is I believe it's the ranches, and so took an example from here, show that there's different. The buildings can vary quite a bit in terms of the style of the buildings or the form and the building envelope. But in this case, they face each other instead of facing a street. These are some more different angles of the same project. And then we obviously have some in the village of Providence Point as well. The next housing type that is one possibility is a small lot, single family. These tend to occur somewhere between, say, 3,000 and 6,000 square feet lots. They basically tend to be similar. They're detached. They're similar to larger single family homes. The lots tend to be narrower, and it's just a way to make provide a lot of the same amenities as larger lot, but in a smaller package so that it reduces costs by, fitting more units per acre. Go ahead. This is another example. This is, I think, the Legacy North project here in North Ogden City. You can see that you can see on the bottom left picture where they've saved space in this particular configuration is in the backyards. I think the backyards are between 15 and 20 feet deep total. And you can see the roof lines are probably 25 feet apart is my guess. The next example is a cottage court. This is essentially where you have multiple buildings on the same lot, and the buildings tend to face each other. They're usually arranged in a U-shaped configuration, and that provides for a courtyard feel that they all front onto. There's multiple ways to do these cottages. You can do them with even just detached buildings all on the same lot. Or you can do one single U-shaped building, or you could do 2 or 3 buildings so that there's gaps in between, so that there's different exits from the courtyard. Let's see. I think what I calculated is one of these usually takes about 1/3 of an acre. But you're getting somewhere between 6 and 10 or 12 units on that lot. So next slide, please. This is an example of the cottage court. This also is in Ogden City. And you can see that they've got the sidewalk that runs through that courtyard. There's a statue in the middle. And then there's a lot of landscaping that sort of softens up the space. Another option is attached units. These are similar. This is basically a duplex. It's just different building form. It does have, what you cannot see in this picture is it does have driveways on both sides. And this may actually have, I can't remember if this unit has 2 or 4. I believe it has 4 actually units in that building, but it's different from an apartment building, and it's just a single.
Is that over at the barn?
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, like 4 units.
Yeah. And so this is another configuration. I just call this small multi-unit buildings, which is typically between a duplex and a sixplex. This is actually almost directly across the street from the courtyard building, the Spanish style courtyard building that we just saw with the fountain. It's on the same block, just on the west side of the street. If you look, most people walking by would probably think it's a single family home, but if you look closely, there's 2 front doors, one on the left and then one in the center. And so that allows people to, to have a building form that looks like a single family home, so that it fits in with the character of the neighborhood, but allows them to reduce their housing costs by making two dwelling units in the same area and potentially bigger than a single family. If you could just actually go back for 1 second. And so just to bring back in that theme of density with dignity, right? The idea of trying to find ways to allow these different types of structures to be compatible with and fit in with in a single family neighborhood, but also provide dignity to those who live there and have the opportunity for people of different backgrounds and economic levels and to have the opportunity to mix and fit into a neighborhood and not have to be at the same price point as everybody else. If you look at the picture on the bottom left, that's the smaller one. That actually is 4 units, and it's a dual level structure. There's it's hard to see the entrances, but there's 2 staircases, one on each side, that go up to the units, and then hidden behind those staircases is some downward staircases that go to the basement level. And that's probably that structure is actually probably smaller than or about the same size as a typical single family home footprint. And there's an issue in planning called block scale versus house scale. One of the things that helps these different types of housing fit into a single family residential neighborhood is keeping them at house scale, so that they have at block scale. The reason why they tend to feel both more urban and big is because they typically come closer to the street and they have more of a wall feeling. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it tends to be a different type of character and experience than you have at house scale. And so any building that it is of roughly the same size and envelope as a house is referred to that house scale. And so these are both buildings that, dwelling types that don't necessarily, that are not single family, but are the same size and scale as single family homes. Next, please. Thanks. So again, going along with this house scale, these are mansion home apartments. They typically have, they look like a single family home. They're designed like a single family home. It's similar to a duplex, but they just look like a large house. And they typically have one entrance, one visible entrance from the main street. And they can have anywhere up to 6 units typically. And so this is one example. And then if you go down, this is another example. This is getting closer to that block scale that we talked about. And it may just be because it's relatively close to the sidewalk. But both of these are actually out in Daybreak, Utah. And so these, I don't know the number of units that are in here, but there could be as many as 12 or more units inside of that building, but they're designed to have more of a feel of a single family home still, so that they fit in the character of the neighborhood. And I think that kind of drives home one point that I think is considered is that there's a principle that I identify as called conditional compatibility, which is we can oftentimes think of as certain uses as, oh, those go well together or they don't go well together. Well, one of the things that can grease the skids, so to speak, in that conversation is the idea of design. That uses that we can sometimes think of as incompatible are actually more compatible when we just design them differently or design them correctly. And that's what I refer to as conditional compatibility. An element of design can make something that if poorly designed wouldn't really fit in a neighborhood or an area, if it well designed, can actually fit quite well and provide some opportunities for different people. So did have a couple of as the city prepares to review the updated future land use map, a couple of things that I think would be helpful concepts to keep in mind is that the idea of decreasing the square footage that's required to get to a sense of dignity. So as I've observed different competing interests in planning, I think that a lot of things come down to the sense of quality and dignity. And if we don't identify that clearly, then you can make size the condition to achieve dignity. And it's not necessarily, if you use good design, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. And the reason why you don't necessarily want to use size in terms of lot or building size as the criteria to get to dignity is because of cost. I mean, we've never seen a market like this in the history of Utah, right? And so that's to not make that clarification of that dignity and quality is really what we're looking for, not necessarily size, is a very expensive thinking error to realize, oh, well, we need this size of lot in order to have neighbors we feel comfortable with or for the building to fit in with the neighborhood. That's one point. And then one of the tools that the city has available to it with regards to influencing design is that at present, because of recent legislation, there's not a lot that you can do in by right zoning for regulating materials and design, but you can still do that with a development agreement. And so if you look at what the city's goals might be, maybe there's some material or design regulation under a development agreement, which the trade-off would be that if you allow those in, then the developer may get a increase in density and greater number of units, number one. But then the city also may want to look at what priorities do we have as a city that we want to get out of these developments, such as we want an extra trail. We think an extra trail connection would be here. If you give us these design regulations and this trail, or you preserve some community asset that is important to the city, then we're willing to grant you an increase in the number of units or allow this type of building type that's not typically allowed by right in the zone. So those are some thoughts that I put together on the topic just to help the city think through those sorts of issues. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? I don't have a question, but, sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I just had a question on like the detached accessory building. Is that like a flag lot? I mean, is that kind of what you're looking at?
No, the way it works is it's a second home on the lot. There's limits on size. but it's actually on the same parcel or lot that a single family home is on. So technically the lot now holds two different structures that both house two household units. And the way to think of this, maybe these are terms that are more like, typical street terms for this sort of thing, is a grandma, like a granny flat or an outbuilding that you see that. I don't know if we go back to that one that was the dark gray, that's an example of it. So it's just a smaller subordinate building on the same property. And they may, maybe family members, or it may be that the family living in the primary dwelling wants to get a little bit of extra income. And one of the things that does of having it on the same lot is it allows the homeowners to, the homeowners sort of police the situation, so to speak, right? They have a vested interest in making sure that they don't tick off their neighbors or let their tenants cause a problem or something like that.
So this is the same homeowner owning both dwellings, and that's the distinction. Because like my brother lives on an acre. My sister wants to move back here from Chicago. She wants a half acre lot. But that would not be this type of situation. This
And so
would be-
subdivided.
Yeah.
So this would be
Yeah.
smaller, so our ordinance really limits it to being smaller than the main home. And,
Well, yeah, I think-
so that's a subdivision.
Yeah, a question.
Right, they have to subdivide.
Not a question, but more of a thought comment. We clearly have competing interests here. We have what we would like to see North Ogden to be and to develop, and the kinds of housing and those kinds of things. We also have the state that has a very clear track that they're wanting to follow. And they've made it pretty clear in the last couple of years, the steps they're willing to take in order to remove us out of the picture if necessary. So for me, the thought is, how do we find that way, as Craig Call mentioned earlier in the evening, how do we get ahead of this so that, it's, whether it's mandated by the state and all the control is taken away from us, which is clearly the direction the state is going, or we start getting ahead of it and being a little braver in the types of housing choices that we have here in North Ogden. How do we strike that balance? Where do we find that balance? Because if we continue to be, as most communities in Utah have been, resistant to higher density housing, more affordable housing, it's going to get forced on us. And then just like with the inspection, House Bill 98 and the inspections, it'll be completely out of our hands. And then the developers will really be able to do whatever they want to without any input.
Councilman Swanson, they haven't considered the fact that cities don't have the infrastructure to handle this.
I don't think they will.
And, that's exactly right. They're not thinking the whole process through as they take these rights away from the city.
Right.
But I've yet to have anybody tell me what affordable housing is in today's market.
We heard it. It's entry level now.
Well, yeah.
It's just a new name.
400,000. We had a developer here who's gonna wanted to build some townhouses, right?
Right.
$400,000 for a townhouse in the community. So to me, they're gonna give these unfunded mandates and let the cities figure it out. But, I think we've got we've got 3 or 4 projects that are on board right now that,
Right.
would provide numerous, but are they affordable is the question.
On the accessory dwellings, I think I've read through what's been written. And I think if I remember correctly, if it's a standalone building, it needs to be 60 feet from an existing dwelling, which is a nice buffer. It's a bigger buffer than, we've got a lot of big lots in North Ogden where people could do that. But if I understood what Brandon was saying about these development agreements, to your point, Councilman Swanson, I do think that we need to get out in front of some of this stuff with things like having a good process for development agreements. There were some really neat pictures there of something that could fit into the communities that we have with some design standards and be unique. But it's probably, you know, to your point, going to require a development agreement process that's a little bit more robust than we currently have. So we have some design standards that provide people options that create dignity, but are in keeping with what people want to see happen here.
I agree. I'd ask Mr. Call to comment on the success we've had with development agreements in the city. Not good,
Yeah.
not good. So I think we do have to be more robust and, you know, figure something out because it's a lot of work. The ones we have are taking a lot of work because it's all starts out well, right? And the developer
Yeah.
has a different aspect of things. So I think you've got a good point there.
So I don't think there's anything we can do to affect affordable housing other than increase supply, right? It's supply and demand. And so basically that's what's always going to get thrown at you if they start talking that is increased supply. Whether it's an entry level home or not, you're increasing the supply.
Well, how much supply do we have online right now, John?
In for sale in North Ogden, less than 10.
Approved.
Oh, new units?
Yeah, approved.
I haven't counted, but anyways, we've
A
probably
lot.
got quite a bit that's approved as far as
So,
lots. and
yeah,
stuff.
that's my point. North Ogden's doing its part for affordable housing, even though we're not building a lot of, and I think we are building a lot of entry level stuff, but even if we can build just, you know, the median home, we're increasing supply and affecting.
I think what you're seeing from the legislature, though, is you have the larger cities, you have Provo, you have Salt Lake City, that are saying, we're tired of by default, caring for and taking care of the lower cost housing. And you've already heard rumblings from, I mean, the original, go back and read, if you can find a copy of the original House Bill 98. I mean, they're talking calculations and algorithms that, okay, North Ogden, you're responsible for this percentage, this number of homes below this value. And you have to build 7%, you know, I don't think it'll be tied to population. They'll look at Salt Lake and say, you've got more than your share. So North Ogden, you've got to build more than your share of homes below this sale point. And you don't have an option. And
if we don't have good design standards with those, we'll get behind the 8 ball and there'll be a bunch of things that get thrown up that aren't great.
well, and I think it's that balance between exerting our rights and what we should be able to do as a city, not rights, because we exist at the will of the state. And the state and having a real loggerhead relationship with them. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we do need to get out in front of it and we need to start thinking about these kinds of things.
Well, and the legislature's already trying to take away cities' say in what a builder could put on the home. If they want to put aluminum siding, they can go put that. You can't say you have to put brick or you have to put rock on them. That just came out the other day that that's what they're trying to do, that the city cannot tell builders what they have to put on a home.
Without a development agreement. Right.
And then the risk is,
Control that, everything's a development agreement.
well, I asked John about that several months ago when this was coming out, when House Bill 98 was going through the chain. You know, so what if we then just make it so that we do everything by development agreement?
New law next year.
The next law next year is that you can't use development agreements.
Essentially, the current law now says you have to have some zones where they can develop by right without the use of the development agreement.
So, I mean, somehow we got to get ahead of this and figure out what we're going to do that is both compliant, but also honors the heritage of North Ogden. And, you know, the traditional single family lot type family feel that we have here.
We need a parkway with a berm of trees.
Right through the middle of the courtyard.
With homes that back to the street.
Speaking of that, Brandon, What do you need from us? Anything else, or just want to let us?
Nope, I
Give
don't
us
need
to
anything.
think through some things?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you for your presentation. Wonderful. Moving on to the sensitive lands, it's really interesting because as you read through that, I mean, there's some pretty deep requirements in there, right, about colors and blending in and. So maybe we could move on to that issue. I think the planning commission has kind of weighed in. They made the recommendation I gave to the council. So maybe, have you had any additional thoughts, or Rob, you want to?
Here to answer questions, Mayor. Several council members said they had some questions, but I didn't receive any emails. So
This is the public input put on it as well, and I'm prepared to talk to that.
You know, and back to the different types of housing and how we get ahead of this. It's not just what kind of homes we want, but you know, we've got to figure out how to stay ahead of it with the infrastructure. You know. It's not the pipes in the ground that certainly talk a lot about it. It's public works, how we maintain the streets, how do we keep them clear? You know, how we shove more people into the police department in Harding County, all have over here, because it's just realistic. The more people you get in the city, right, the more potential crime you have. It's just the fact of life. So we've also got to figure out how to stay ahead of that. Because I think that's what we're kind of finding out. Things exploded so quickly, the growth, that we've got infrastructure problems we're trying to resolve. So to think through those things, we need to stay ahead of that.
So there's a terminology that was popular a few years ago called smart growth. It addressed the social side of it, but it did very definitely look at the design side and cost of infrastructure and what have you. So one of the things that people look at when you look at the kinds of design options that Brandon was talking about is that in many instances it makes it a lot more economical to provide some of those infrastructure services when you end up with some of these smaller lots and those types of developments and that. So they're not all spread out. And you end up having to do something else. Getting away from as far as the sensitive lands ordinance, it does not do anything with respect to single family homes. It actually gives some options, single family homes, and it gives an option for some flat lots and what have you under certain circumstances.
It seems like we were going to have this meeting tonight because we had developers who wanted to give us their input. I'm seeing them here.
Yeah.
They gave to us, like I said, if you want to, or maybe you guys read the minutes and have that already.
Yeah, I went through it. I spent some time with John today. It seems like their major concern was the fact that there was too much authority put in the city engineer. We trust Lauren, but we don't know who will be Lauren's replacement. So is there any ideas on how to balance that? The only thing I had that I felt strongly about, which is contrary to what the commission, I don't think we want houses over 25 feet up in the sensitive land areas. I know there was a comment from the planning commission that we ought to let that flow with the rest of the zones. But I just figure like if we're trying to keep that beautiful, we don't want taller homes blocking, you know, the mountainside.
In the public comment, I think excited with us that was too limited already. The few public comments we got.
Well, I would like to go as high as they would like, but.
Can-
Councilman Swanson.
I just want to back up a little. I mean, I have a ton of questions. I have tons. And I thought it would be beneficial for us all to discuss them. The first question that I have, and I spoke with John a little bit about this, is what sensitive lands are we protecting? When we talk about sensitive lands, typically, right, we're protecting some kind of fauna or flora that's unique, that's rare. There's something on the land itself that we're trying to protect. That doesn't exist up here. As I read through this ordinance, what I see is we're trying to protect homeowners from some geological conditions that might be bad for building a home on, right? And so that's my first question. Why are we calling this a sensitive lands? What's sensitive about those lands versus all the land that North Ogden's been built on,
Okay.
other
Good
than
question.
topography?
Well, the term sensitive, you can use whatever term you want. But the idea behind this is that we have, it's mainly a hillside ordinance.
Right.
It has to do with slope.
Right.
And so it has those geologic and other physical form features
Sure.
that make it sensitive in that sense. So that you need to pay attention as part of your design to make sure that whatever design that does occur is going to address those issues. And in fact, it does protect, it does address a wide range of things, everything from the very physical hard sciences and all the way to, as you indicated, the vegetative side of it, as well as it actually deals with wildlife as well.
Yeah, I
We're
thought-
building up in it's not just North Ogden. Everybody seems to be building on where our winter range is for animals. So how do we deal with those kinds of things?
There was a vegetation disturbance limitation in it, as I recall.
But what vegetation are we protecting?
What we're talking about is making sure that whatever is done up there, specifically the grading aspect of it, that the landscaping that it does occur there is going to protect that, so that we're not. Gonna
Sure.
end up with- That's what we're.
So it
talking
doesn't
about.
create a slide, make it more prone to sliding or something along those
So
lines.
they have to, specific studies have to be identified, are there potential issues with the relationship to the types of soils, any faults that happen to be there, any landslides, either ancient or modern. All of those things need to be addressed in order to make sure that whatever the design, it addresses those kinds of things.
So I think that was an excellent question. So
Well,
go ahead.
let me just ask one clarifying question.
Sure.
Is it, and Lauren, maybe this is more of an engineering question, and Rob, with your experience, obviously, I look at a couple of the, we have one 18,000 square foot house up there. We have another one that's pretty darn close to that size. Are we concerned? I mean, they're built on pretty slopey area, pretty high slope up there. Is it possible for a structure to be built that would induce some kind of a slide because of the geography that's below it? Is that a concern, or are we, I'm trying to decide to see, are we trying to protect the land, which is what sensitive lands seems to imply, or are we trying to protect those that will build by saying, we're going to place limitations based on the topography, the geography, and, fault line deformation and all that kind of good stuff, so that you don't build a home that ends up coming down the mountain?
So
Yeah.
for me, I think it's an excellent question, by the way. So, and I had some of the same concerns. For me, when we got into this, I realized we were looking to protect land that maybe isn't even North Ogden. So from wildfire. So when something happens in that area and flames go up, so two things, it's gonna go 2,000 feet straight up, right?
Sure.
And how do we get in there to protect it at that point? Well, you've seen Coldwater Canyon, right?
Yeah.
And also that incident that happened a few years ago in South Weaver, where that area started on fire.
Right.
And those residents darn near didn't get, excuse me, please strike that. Darn near didn't get out of the,
That was Brandon Mason, Commissioner.
out of their subdivisions.
Yeah.
Because of the topography that existed and the fact that when flames came, they had one exit out of there because they had to build such
Sure.
unique ways because of the slope. And so when I started thinking about that, I started to support this in general. So I felt like it doesn't necessarily protect that area, but it protects that area. On that one.
I have a daughter that works for the Weaver Fire District, and the fire people went up there and they talked to some of those homeowners about doing some removal of land, landscaping. Oh, this is my place. Oh, guess what? Guess who's rebuilding their house?
Yeah.
Somebody that was a bit headstrong and not very wise. So the whole point of all of this is I'll just refer to a story. There's nothing worse than ending up having to condemn a house because there's either a landslide or some
Right.
other aspect of it. And when I was working for Ogden, especially on the south side of the Ogden Canyon there were some homes that actually had to be condemned because these kinds of things were not taken into account. You're familiar with the slide that's going on right
Sure.
now in Riverdale. And there's some homes there that are being condemned. and what have you. This is all about being preventative, to make sure that the future residents of this city are going to be in a safe location. When I buy my
Right.
house, I'm going to be able to sleep at night.
It's protecting the resident and their investment, not necessarily the land itself.
It's a combination of both of those things, because when you do one, you can use the other.
Rob, the one concern I had about, and maybe you can address this, the one
Sure.
concern I had about this sensitive lands idea is the, when you take in consideration that overlay, you don't have to go too far from like Hall's Orchard and where you move north along the Wasatch Front toward Bend. So much of that topography changes. And I don't know if just one amendment or one ordinance is the cure all for all of that. Or if it's better to kind of retain that hillside protection approach where we're kind of taking each area on its own merit. So my curiosity would be, why is this better than the hillside protection? Is it better? And if you're saying to me that this sensitive is better, then could you give me maybe a couple of examples of why this is better than the hillside protection?
Hillside protection is not going away. What is happening is that there are specific design standards for properties that are to develop within that area. What we have now are some very generalized statements. The mayor mentioned about, too much responsibility from the city engineer. Well, now it's a whole lot of responsibility for the private developer to go out and hire an engineer or a geotech that's going to be able to give him what he wants with respect to his ideas for what is appropriate on that property. In this instance, the geotech is going to be held to a standard of, hey, here are the things that you have to address in your studies. We don't have that today. It's a very general set of statements.
So none of the options on the hillside protection say you have to have a geotech report, you have to have a soils test. you have to have
It does say that, but that's all it says. What's your definition of the geotech report?
It doesn't say what the report has to
That's to
contain.
say.
This new ordinance does give that.
Does give that.
That's the specificity that I believe is really important for the city.
So in other words,
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, so in other words, when I look at this diagram, when we talk about the sensitive land overlay, what we're really saying, we're just kind of taking this and putting it over the hillside protection plans that exist on different parcels of ground there between Hall's Orchard and say Barrett's Canyon.
So the map that's up there, which you now can't read, it's basically everything to the north and east of Mountain Road.
Right. Well, I understand that part, but I guess maybe I'm not conveying it appropriately, but I look at like what was his name? Steve Hall? Richard Hall. Yeah. I mean, his ground is so much different
It's flat.
than when you get, a couple blocks north.
Yeah.
And now it becomes cliffy and so I guess in my mind, I'm just thinking, okay, can we really put one bandage on this that's gonna meet all of that topography? And I guess what you're telling me is that yes.
Like,
So my
Each of-
understanding is right,
each-
that each
each
one is,
prop-
it has to, and in other words, the flat one is gonna be able to pass the all of the tests that it says that are specified by this. Whereas the hilly one is gonna say, don't
So
build
there's
there.
gonna be a
Is that
different.
what I am understanding right?
You're right. And so let me help you. Well, I'm gonna try to help. Remember the significance of this ordinance and its process. North Ogden City has one of the better land use review processes I've ever worked in, and I've worked in a lot. And one of the best things that the city ever established was our technical review. So when somebody submits an application, doesn't matter whether you're in the sensitive lands or you're in the flat somewhere else out there, what we end up doing is those people that are involved in the review, the technical side of it, that includes Lauren, it includes planners, includes all public works, includes the fire marshal, includes Pine View. Anybody that has anything to do with that project has an opportunity to say, oh, okay, here's your concept. Here are the standards that you need to meet in order to develop on that property. And that process is not changing, except for the fact that when you're in this area, then you have more defined things that you have to accomplish as a part of your final submittal.
So our kickback from like West Side and Hall and some of those, Carson Jones, if this was a really good thing, why are we putting, is our restrictions too restrictive?
So
Yeah.
when the planning commission debated this, we weren't all unanimous on everything. Just, I don't know what was reflected in the minutes, but and please keep me honest here, okay? I think we mostly supported it. Eric Thomas was against it for basically that purpose. Why don't we just incorporate these principles into the hillside protection zones? He eventually sided with us and voted with us, and I think we were unanimous. I think the vote was, if I recall. Because we felt gave more granularity for what you're talking about. So the hillside protection zone is a broader thing, and this just covers that steeper slope of it. Now, there's going to be some spots in there that don't, but I felt like I needed to at least tell you that we debated that and we weren't unanimous, and it wasn't. It took some convincing. And Eric, who's probably the wisest of us, sorry guys, was in your camp there. Well, hey, let's just take those and put these principles in the hillside protection. And he eventually came around, and he may have reluctantly come around, but he voted in favor of it. So
It's interesting. I think to Councilman Swanson's point, there's various protections in there, I think, with the amount of surface that could be up there for watershed, disturbance of vegetation. But the thought I have, we spent some time talking about making Mountain Road a beautiful road, right? What makes this city unique? It's where we're located.
Yeah.
And those foothills, just, as I say, Councilman Swanson always reminds me, I don't have a vote. But to me, it's protection of the beauty of that hillside.
Now, here's the question though, to counter that. It's not our foothills. It isn't our foothills. It is Richard Hall's foothills. It is Randy Marriott's foothills. Above the forest line where it becomes public, that's our land.
So there's a point on that I'll disagree with, because we don't own the land.
Right.
But there are two elements to it. One, it is a community.
Sure.
And two, everyone who has purchased a home here has also purchased, within certain height requirements or whatever,
Sure.
a view.
Right.
And so they may own that land, but they don't own everything about it. There's some esoteric pieces there's a visual element to that they may own that land.
Sure.
But it's a little bit more nuanced when it's not flat.
But the philosophical side isn't the same as legal side. Right? Yeah, we want it to look like, I want it to stay looking the way it is, but it's not my land.
But it's whether you're going to annex it into the city or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are
that's-
controls that we
That
can
makes a little
do.
bit of difference, because without annexing into the city, they can do about 200 units.
So
They're asking for 600 of them.
here's my question, Ben. Are we encouraging the state to do what they're continuing to do? To step in and take away our ability,
They'll do it either way.
because
That's their mindset.
this adds fuel to the fire when we say our foothills. And I get you 100%. I totally get the nuanced piece of it. I'm looking at it from a strictly legal side. When this goes to court, as Craig showed us earlier, the final arbiter is the court. And so when a court looks at this and says, okay, Phil and Johnson both like the nuanced feel. We bought into this community. I'm a transplant. I think you're a transplant.
Grew up here, actually.
Oh, you grew up here.
Yeah, moved away for a long time.
You're a transplant, those of us transplants. And a developer says, I'm gonna take you to court. Because you have there's nothing solid for you to stand on these nuances. I have a right to develop my land. It's within, it's below the 20%. This is what it was intended to be.
So are you
I don't see
saying-
us winning that battle.
Are you saying that supports a sensitive lands issue or refutes it?
I'm saying it refutes it.
And I would actually, in listening to what you're saying, say it actually supports it.
How do you legally tell somebody? I mean, what the state is saying, you're too restrictive on what you're allowing people to do with their land from a development standpoint. We don't even want you to be able to tell them what color it can be.
I think.
And we want to come in with an ordinance that says, well,
Yeah, but zoning principles have stood up to
because
the Supreme
we,
Court, right? Like, then this is just a zoning ordinance, in my opinion,
but
right?
the Supreme Court has nothing to do with Utah law.
Well, I'm saying, you asking me how a piece of legislation can stand up. Yeah, you can't put restrictions on people, and I'm saying absolutely, we do it all day long.
Now, what I'm
With
saying is
zoning.
the state legislature is coming in because of the complaints from developers, from situations like this, and saying, yeah, you can use your own, we're going to create it so that you can use your own inspector. We're going to pass a law that says they can't tell you what kind of siding to have on the side of a home. We keep trying to, and the question that I wrote down at the very beginning, is this really an artificial way to stunt growth in North Ogden? And if a case for that can be made, I don't think we have a legal leg to stand on.
Yeah, and for me, it wasn't a way to stunt growth.
It's not a matter of whether you think it that's way. It's whether or not a developer, a Richard Hall, a Randy Marriott, anybody who's got land can go to a court and say, the real purpose of this, go back and listen to all these city council meetings where you hear them talking about our foothills, right? Legally, it isn't our foothills. It's their foothills because they own land. And I think, I don't know, John, you could chime in, but
So parcels of
That's a
Washington
very good
Boulevard,
point.
theirs or ours? It's the
What's
same
that?
thing. What about parcels of Washington Boulevard? These are design standards we want to incorporate on land.
Under that philosophy, there's no zoning.
Right.
But not-
What we do all day. I believe.
I'm not
think what
saying
Phil
that,
is-
that there isn't zoning. I'm saying, are we trying to artificially downgrade the zoning because we want the foothills as bare as possible? And if that, I mean, at one point in this city, the city council was approached by a measure by a group of people who didn't like soccer being played on a Sunday and wanted the neighborhood quiet. So we had a council member who proposed that we have an ordinance banning soccer on Sundays, and that was shot down. Same council member came back saying, well, I've read research that grass needs to rest. Serious, folks. Yeah, I'll go back and get you the minutes. So let's use Sundays to let grass rest. Well, you know what? Maybe grass does need to rest, and typically it does, turf that's used for sporting events and stuff. But the mere fact that Sunday would have been the chosen day in this community made it smell of religious discrimination.
But when you throw public safety in, that's different than grass growing. And I believe this is a public safety issue.
And I don't have any issue with the over the 20% and the standards. I think we just have to be careful with this overlay that we're not fooling ourselves and saying, well, in the name of public safety and all of this thing, all of that is the means that we get to the end, which is stunt growth on the hillside.
I really respect what you're saying, and I think you're being very transparent on something that is an important consideration. I do.
I don't know the
They,
answer.
they've got a zone right now, for instance, if you're talking about Marriott's ground, they got a zone right now. They can keep it. They can keep it and they can go to the
Right.
county. The reason they're coming to us is because they want more,
Right,
More density.
more density.
right,
And that's the council's decision whether they want to annex that in.
right.
But they don't, we have no obligation to annex that
No.
into the city. And if they want to annex it into the city, then we talk about a development agreement. If they don't, they can go develop that under the
Well, and
county.
we've had that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a stunt growth thing. It's the fact of, do we have the infrastructure? And you listen to our engineer and all the things that are up there, I mean, runs right through the fault, right? I think the ordinance talks about the 50 or 100 feet
And
off the
there are,
fault.
there are myriad of different geological and different hazards that exist here, but each property may have its unique characters that need to be addressed. Some may not have a fault line running through it. Others may have a debris flow that comes right out of the canyon into theirs. Others may have an avalanche chute that has to be addressed. But everyone doesn't have all the same. Each one has its own unique.
And I think I might have drilled down a little bit further than intended. I think as a council and commission, we have to be careful that this giant swath of land that everybody keeps saying, we gotta save our foothills. And then all of a sudden, commission and council comes up with a way to save our foothills. I think that to many people, it will smell. It's too coincidental that this part that so many residents, some don't, some do, but you know, it's been very vocal. We got to save our foothills. We got to save our foothills. We got to save our foothills. And then all of a sudden, council and commission comes up with a way to save the foothills. Kind of smells. And I just think we have to make sure, as we're going through all this, that public safety really is the prime reason that we're doing it. And we make the decisions that we make based on public safety, not open land preservation that's kind of hidden behind public safety. I think we ought to be.
How does that work with the general plan when we say we want X amount of already 20 ground in the city? I mean, we're talking about the hillside there, but don't we have the same problem? We're saying if let's say the general plan committee comes back and they're saying, we recommend RE20 and we're not going to down zone that if it's vested. I mean, I understand solely what you're saying, but we have that issue on just about any zone we do. I mean, if I'm a developer and you hold me to R12.5 and I want R18, it's the same issue. So, John?
Yeah.
Correct. No, I promise, I promise Councilman Barker. Councilman Barker, I promise.
I was just gonna, instead of saying we're protecting our foothills, 30 years ago, we had a slide. Who's gonna protect the residents when another slide comes down? North Salt Lake had a slide, what, 5 years ago? They went after the city because the city did not protect the residents that built there or that lived below it.
Right.
Riverdale's in the lawsuit over a slide. We're protecting the city by requiring extra geotech saying we want to see this, this, and this. It protects the city. When we had the fire in Pole Patch 5 years ago, I was in the command trailer where we crossed off every home in Pole Patch because the fire was going to go through there. And the only reason it was saved is because there was a plane in the sky already. Because we could not get our trucks up there and the people could not get out.
Right.
We had them all crossed off because there was no access. We're protecting in case of a fire. This is not just, we want to protect the foothills. Yes, as we go up the hill, more emergencies happen. So yes, we're protecting the foothills because more emergencies, more things happen the further up you go, because now you're dealing with, well, gravity.
Sure.
And fire runs uphill, not downhill. So if there's a fire on the hill, I don't have to worry about my house because I'm a flatlander and fire won't come down to it. But we're trying to protect as it goes up the hill.
Sure. So do we, as Councilman Severing, I think I liked his idea or suggestion, is it more appropriate that we do this instead of one big swath? Because I think he very accurately described the topography. You go from Hall's Orchard, that's pancake flat.
But not every point in this applies. As you go, like Rob said, we have our TRC, our technical review committee, when it comes up, we're gonna say this portion applies to you. If you don't
Not
like it,
every
bring it up to the
portion.
council or the planning commission.
And
I
our
mean,
process also allows for developers to go to the planning commission before they even make a submittal and ask for a concept review. And say, hey, this is the unique characteristics of my land. This is my vision for our property. This is what I'd like to do. So each one of these, in my mind, this was started by staff some 2 years ago. It has absolutely nothing to do with the discussion that was happening at the General Plan Advisory Committee. Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing.
I know that. And I think we can convey that message all we want to. The perception is different.
Well, I had that very conversation with Carson Jones. I said, Carson, you are absolutely 100% in error with that thought. I was very direct with him, and I straightened him out with respect to that.
So can I ask one other question? Because I've got 100 of them, but I'll only ask one. How are orchards natural vegetation? Can somebody explain that to me? I mean, we have natural open space that includes hillside, sagebrush, or natural vegetation. And then we have natural vegetation defined as shall include orchards, indigenous trees, shrubs, grass, and perennial growth. How is an orchard something that we need to protect or as if it's natural vegetation? I'm just curious. How did orchards become natural there's nothing natural. 150 years ago, they weren't here.
I don't think it's natural. It's maybe historical. It's been one of the earlier things, but it's not a natural.
Right, I'm just curious though, why it.
And Bill, your train of thought is a lot like Eric's. He didn't agree with, he wanted, like I said earlier on, and he had a few things, and he was crossing them off, and we were changing it. That's how we came to our recommendation, was he had specifics like that that he disagreed with. And we took him out of it. Yeah. And Eric's were.
Well, I'm not saying there doesn't need to be protections up there. I'm not saying that at all. I don't want that to come across at all. I just think I think we need to be smart and careful about how we do it, that public safety really is the only reason that we do the things that we do. That we're not trampling landowner rights, because as we heard earlier tonight, right? A landowner's rights are higher than the rest of us, right? Your rights on your land are higher than my rights on your land. And we have to be careful that we're not trampling those rights, encouraging the state to do more of what they're doing.
I can sleep well at night knowing that I voted for it for those reasons. Now, whether it's perceived that way or not, I don't know, but I did vote for it for those reasons.
Yeah.
I feel like it protects.
We do have some of the developers online with us. So you want to hear from them now?
Oh, sure. I didn't realize they were there.
Yeah, I didn't either. So who do we have on, Katie?
So we have Bruce Parker would like to make a comment right now. We've also got County Marriott and Matt Murdoch. So we'll,
Who's Bruce Parker with?
They're all the same. It's all west. They're all
It's all west. Okay.
so Bruce is making the first comment. Go ahead, Bruce, you're unmuted, or you're allowed to present.
We okay now?
Yes.
Members of mayor and city council members and planning commission members. My name is Bruce Parker. I'm with Westside Investments with Cammie and Randy Marriott, and I'm the author of the letter that I sent to you as part of the public hearing process back in November. I just want to recognize the mayor and city council for your courtesies to us. I had some email communications back from you, so thank you very much. And I guess the point that we would like to make is there an opportunity for an ongoing conversation with you and the Planning Commission about these issues. Let me just identify 2 or 3 little items, and I know I respect your time. You've been here late tonight. Maybe the city council and mayor needs to rest on Wednesdays after a long and lengthy work session on Tuesdays. But our concern is, first of all, the number of studies required and who's asking for those studies to come forward. Let me give you an example. I'm presently working with a client in Cottonwood Heights City. They also have sensitive lands issues and slope and soil stability. They don't ask us to do what is mandated by this ordinance. What they ask us to do is look at the faults. Go out, hire a geotech engineer and discover if there's any faults. Go out and find if there's any slope issues. And they and us defer to the expertise of the geological engineers and the geotech engineers to use their best professional judgment and practice to bring a report back. We're not required to go to the Planning Commission, and commissioners, I fully respect what you're doing. But with respect, you don't have the expertise in-house to tell us what a geotech engineer should be looking for. We believe there's federal and state agencies available with that information that we could go to. There's a potential that there's a fault on your property. If we can discover that, I don't think Westside Investments or any other developer would be hesitant to do that. Because what we've heard from your staff is, one is the goal of this ordinance is public safety. The other is quality, building quality neighborhoods. And I don't think we have competing interests here. I think we'd like to come together with the City Council and the Planning Commission to work that through, what that means, and give definitive examples of how this ordinance will actually apply. The example I just gave in Cottonwood Heights, 10 acres, a geotech report, $200,000. If we're required to do that level of detail, and we expect we should be, we could be in the millions of dollars just doing reports and studies based on what the city staff or the Planning Commission requests. We believe there should be other authorities, others with expertise to request that, such as a federal or state agency. If we're able to find maps that clearly show a potential for a fault or a trace, and they're available at the state or federal level, I don't think we're not hesitant to do those studies. What we are hesitant to do is to go out on a whim and potentially say, we think there's a fault there, go and spend thousands of dollars to see if you can find it. That's problematic. The other point we make is that if indeed we have those professionals involved in those studies, the city should be confident enough that those professionals, when they put their stamp on those studies, to recognize their professional and integrity as is at stake. But what this ordinance asks is for the city engineer or someone else to review and sign off. And we respect the city engineer, but we do not believe he has the expertise that a geotech engineer would have. And we're just using that as one example. The other concern we have here is that there's a request to minimize construction between a period of October 1 to April, I think it was April the 15th. Our question is why? If we have the appropriate protections in place for erosion or whatever it may be, why can't we go ahead and start construction? That's often when most construction occurs, during those winter months when the soil is stable and we don't have a lot of runoff. That's an onerous restriction that we're just concerned about, members of the City Council, that we're in full agreement. We agree with the idea of safety. It's just how best to achieve it. The final point, we requested that clustering be allowed to protect the lands that you wish to protect. And the response from the planning commission was, and your staff, who we also respect, was to say, let's apply the PRUD ordinance. Your PRUD ordinance does not apply in this situation if we get a zone that's different from R1 or R2. Your R1 and R2 zones with a PRUD overlay allows us to do attached units, which may be appropriate as a way to protect this landscape. As drafted, we cannot do that because we may not have an R1 or an R2 zone. We might have some hillside zone that the PRD provisions as drafted simply do not apply. And we can't use those. So we've asked the city manager and Rob Scott to say, would you entertain a clustering provision that we think could work for us? And they've been very responsive to say, yes, propose something, but we'd like to propose that in the context of this discussion. And we'd rather have that occur with you as you consider and debate this sensitive lands provision. That's a number of policy issues. We also have a number of technical design and engineering issues we'd like to chat with you and the staff about. But in the interest of time, I just want to simply stop there and ask you if you had any questions of me.
Rob? Anyone? John? Things to consider. I think you have some valid points there.
Mayor, I think we could have a very collaborative and productive discussion as we go on. However, we hope that this is not an urgent matter. We believe it's appropriate to have a very deliberate and an in-depth discussion.
So one of the things that he brought up was having specifications clearly outlined. So he's thinking that there's just going to be a whole bunch of discretion on the city engineer. So Warren's going to say, oh, but it sounds to me like you've written it so it's like, okay, it's got to be within this range. I mean, that's how I read it. It doesn't seem to be interpreted that way, that it's going to be somehow not.
Council member, it's not being interpreted that way. Because although you identify the 12 or 13 studies that we're required to provide, there is no clarity on the breadth or the depth of those studies. Now, I know Rob will say, well, the planning commission and the city engineer will work with you on that. That's not the best answer we're looking for, quite frankly. We'd like to have a role of a professional person, whether it's in wildlife, we can go to the state on the state fire marshal's issues on wildlife, or excuse me, wildfires, or wildlife on the Department of Natural Resources or those other state or federal agencies, and get them to identify what we need to study. It's just so open-ended right now, Commissioner, that we're worried that every one of these studies would be required independent of having any valid information to require them.
Do you have a comment?
So my response to that, Bruce, is that you are more than welcome to use any and all studies from the state or other professionals that you can submit as part of your application. We will take those to the appropriate folks, and based on those recommendations and what have you, I think you'll find this pretty darn reasonable when it comes to being able to address those.
Could we just clarify that they can't bring those type of reports in?
Absolutely.
In place of us demanding all these other reports?
Well,
We just clarify that, Rob?
well, what they can do is demonstrate that those particular things may not be an issue and don't require the depth of study.
But can we just verify that they can do that by bringing in those type of reports?
We do that all the time.
I know, but once again, they're saying it just relies on the particular person. I mean, if we put that in the document, I think that solves the problem and it doesn't hurt.
Well, I don't think that it's, I doubt very seriously that a state agency is going to start getting involved in city matters. What they will do.
They're doing that now, aren't they?
Well, the legislature is the legislature. The people that actually implement things are quite a different group of individuals, and many of them are just equally qualified professionals. In fact, we've had many conversations over time with these individuals, encouraging them to provide and give us additional reports so that we know what is it that we need to make sure that is addressed in these particular, within these particular properties.
So thanks for your input on that. What about the October 1st to April 15th date?
So we
What's the-
changed that.
So that's,
I mean, we have a thing that says construction of the development site shall be of a nature that will minimize the disturbance of vegetated cover, especially between October 1st and April 15th of the following year. We also have a provision that basically says that we also changed. There were some other dates that were in there. We took those out and said, basically, you propose a grading and drainage plan and a landscape plan that addresses these things. They'll be approved as part of their review. So those things are, I believe, are addressed.
Mayor?
yes, sir.
We appreciate Rob's response. We're still concerned. And it's the vagueness of the language that's used. If indeed a federal or state agency has information, we'll use that. But what we're barking at is having anyone in the city impose themselves into a position that a state and federal agency presently occupies. If we've got wildlife experts at the state, let them speak and we'll respond to them. I don't think, with all due respect to your planning commission staff, I don't know if you have anyone in there licensed in or with expertise in wildlife habitat matters. Secondly, this issue of we will work to minimize grading during the periods of October to April is exactly the problem. We might do complete earth moving during that period, quite frankly, in a way to prepare for the construction season in the spring. We might completely grade the site. We will not minimize it. So that's the realities of where we are on the private side. And let me just share with you this. I'm a planning consultant. I work for the private sector as well as the public. I understand exactly where your staff is coming from. I just think they've taken too broad a brush to address an issue which we think we can define much more clearly and more definitively. It's like the Supreme Court said, well, you just shot off a missile to kill a mouse. We don't need to do that, Mayor, and respectfully, Planning Commission members and the City Council.
Okay, appreciate your input. Anything else?
Mayor, yes, we've got quite the list, but I'm not going to belabor the points tonight. Like the council member, we probably have 100 points and 100 questions. I've limited it to 3 or 4 tonight, but thank you.
So Bruce, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
So it almost sounds like, well, 2 things. I mean, perception's reality. So when I hear you talk, you almost sound like you and the Cami and others would be almost going up and above and beyond what we may require as a city.
I think there is a potential for that, council member.
And that's good. I'm actually suggesting that as a good thing. But that's what you seem to be saying is our city engineer is not an expert in wildlife management. So we'll go out and get a wildlife management officer to come in and teach us about what we need to do.
If indeed there's evidence to exist that property that we're developing is impacted by some sort of a wildlife habitat or winter range or whatever it may be.
So in other words, again, just for clarity, okay?
Sure.
Willing to even go up and above and beyond what requirements the city might place as far as testing in the area, right?
Exactly right. If we have a definitive standard, we could do that. And my example on clustering is another one. Your PRUD provisions and the draft that your staff has in front of you will not protect any lands. Because one of the options available to us is to include any sensitive or critical lands within the boundary of a lot. That's one of our options available to us. We think that's a bit wrong-headed. maybe you should be looking at some public access to these sensitive lands. I'm just offering that up as an alternative. I don't want to commit to for Randy and Cami, but should be able to look at those things if there's a quid pro quo, it's a benefit to the city and to us.
So under contract, to make sure that everything is completely clear on both sides.
Well, one aspect we have too much detail, and the other aspect we don't have enough, so we gotta find the balance somewhere on it.
Is there such a way of, for like Bruce to come up with all the tests they feel like they would like to do, what we would want them to do, and then bring them together?
No, I don't think, if I understand Bruce right, he's not objecting to the number of tests. He's just saying if they're already available, why would the city accept those? And I think that whichever group would say, you know, these are the things that apply to this piece of ground that we need. If I'm understanding things right, we're not objecting to them bringing in reports from other experts, instead of having them reoccur.
If I could just clarify, if there's material out there in a federal or state agency, that would be our starting point. That would give us an indication there's a potential for that condition to exist on our property. And then we would engage the necessary expertise to do those studies. But right now we've got 12 or 13 studies, and it's a bit like a wild goose chase. Go out there and see what we've got and tell us what, or we'll tell you. We think there's already authorities in place that would help us through that process much more efficiently.
So I still think there's a room to have them detail what they want to do, what we want to do.
We've detailed, I think, what we want.
Because you just taught us about development agreements, and this would be one, I could just say.
About development.
No, you taught us, we learned a lot.
Any other comments?
Cami Marriott would like to make a comment.
Okay, Cami?
Cami, go ahead.
Thank you. Randy is here with me as we're listening to all of this, and we're really appreciating the comments and the discussion that's gone on. Feel like you guys are putting a lot of thought into this, and we appreciate that. A couple of things we wanted to add in addition to what Bruce has said. First of all, maybe just going on some of the past projects that we've done up there, which we have done under the current hillside ordinance. We have provided avalanche studies. We have provided geotech reports and any other reports that have been required per project we've done up there. We have already built a couple of detention or debris basins, I should say, for the avalanche control. And we've done everything as been asked under the current ordinance. And we feel like all the projects that we've built up there have been very nice quality. And I guess the question maybe for you guys to consider is there a project up there that maybe you don't like something about that this ordinance would correct? And if so, maybe let's address what those are and see if they can be remedied for the future. We also feel like that a lot of these issues can also be addressed in a development agreement, which would definitely have a lot of thought and consideration put into it, along with the requirements for any studies or any other requirements to get a development approved under a development agreement.
Councilman Swanson has a comment.
I just, Bruce, tell me if you're still on, I'm trying to encapsulate the thinking that you're having regarding the studies. And I've been sitting here, you all know I like little analogies, right? If my wife and I go to the doctor because we're not feeling well, there's two things the doctor knows the moment we walk in the door. I don't need a pregnancy test, and she doesn't need a prostate exam. Right?
That's right.
You know that immediately because I can't get pregnant and women don't have prostate glands, right?
And so, I want to make sure what insurance you have as well, Councilman.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that if you're looking at the Federal Registry of Fault Line Identification, I don't think that's a real thing, but it sounded good, didn't it?
Sounds like it.
And there are no known faults in a particular area. There shouldn't be a requirement that you conduct fault studies in that area. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly right. That's right. That's
Okay,
exactly
okay.
right.
That clears it up for me. Thanks.
Could I make a comment about that though?
The point is, who is it that decides whether or not the study is required or not? Are you going to rely on someone outside of city government to make that decision? I don't think that's a wise choice.
Rob, I think the city council's got to rely on the expertise. I'm sorry to disagree, but you or the other city council staff members simply do not have the ranges of expertise you're asking for in these studies. That's our point.
Well, my point is that we're hired to make those decisions, and they're based on specific studies. In fact, the city already conducted a study some 20 years ago that we rely on all the time as to whether or not that there needs to be some additional review along the way. So I just think that we're trying to stir something up here that just doesn't make sense to me.
Cammy, do you have other comments? You or Randy?
City council.
Yeah, Randy Marriott, can you hear me?
You can, Randy, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been up there since the 80s. In fact, I was in North Ogden when that flood occurred over there, and we weren't up there. We were over there in Coldwater Canyon. There was no water come out of that mountain area. That's a unique mountain. It faces the sun really well, and it melts it after it snows. It melts, and we've done a lot of work up there to prepare for doing this development. We put in nice developments, and some of the things you're asking for, these guys can't even put in swimming pools up there. I think that's ridiculous. I think the water issue in that area is never, the one time up there, maybe the Barker was talking about fire over there at Pleasant View. Well, them's 5-acre lots, and they're harder to control, and it's more natural. And if you got some roads, you can get at them. I put fires out up there that people had started, kids have started with a dozer before in the 90s. I'm just saying that I built 2 avalanche basins to stop avalanche. We've done avalanche studies. We've done fault studies. I've been through this. We did a deal back in the 90s or 2000, the hillside studies. I had to get, they were wanting to put a golf course up there, North Ogden, and keep it all an open space or a sensitive area. And that was a taking. I didn't like that. So we had to kind of change North Ogden's mind. But I've been through this once. I've been around quite a while. Is there something you guys don't like about a guy having a tennis court or a swimming pool up there? Because if you don't like that, this study, you can't have that. This new ordinance. Is that what you guys want up there?
I don't know where you get the idea that somebody can't have a swimming
Yeah,
pool.
it's you can only build so much percentage of the ground,
The impervious.
the impervious area.
Well, that's already in the ordinance. And in fact, we made ordinance
It may be
a lot less.
Ordinance, so why would we do it? This is ridiculous. This is the taking. This is, I build good projects. I've never built a bad project. Go up through North Ogden there and show me one bad project. and they're all
Yeah,
safe.
I don't think we've got any bad projects. I don't think I've heard anyone talk about
No.
dissatisfaction of any of
I
your.
can point to project I don't like.
The sensitive areas.
Yeah.
Then we'll make
Anything else, Randy?
changes. It's all covered. So why are we making changes? This is my livelihood. This is what I built as good houses for you guys up there. Beautiful houses, beautiful homes. This is not, and that thing you can't dig between October and April, couldn't dig a basement if you wanted to. These kind of things are ridiculous. You guys really need to think about. This is very nice.
Yeah, well, I
ground.
think
And I've spent money.
these are some issues that, the planning commission has made their recommendation, so it lies with the city council now. So let's sit down and just see if we can't, because it seems like there's some misunderstandings, according to Rob here, and let's maybe address those and see, if we can't come to some common ground on that, so. I think we've heard the things you're concerned about, so anything else?
Mayor, I'd like to see us put a group together where we can sit down with concerned parties on both sides and talk about these, where we differ. Couple of council members, the developers, John, Rob.
Yeah, we can talk about that at council and put something together.
Yeah. Okay.
So. Okay, anything else? Thanks for joining us this evening, and we appreciate your input. Rob, thank you. Keep smiling.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Hey, life is good for me.
Katie?
Mostly retired.
We have some.
Bruce would like to make another comment.
Bruce, you have another comment?
Go ahead, Bruce.
Mayor and City Council, that's exactly what we're asking for. We'd like to have a productive and ongoing discussion with a working group. We think we can come to something that would work for everyone. And so mayor and council members, thank you very much. If you're receptive to that idea, we're happy to engage. Thank you.
And thank you. Anything else? Katie?
No other comments.
All right, we'll move on then to item number 7. Do we have any public comments? Anyone? See anyone that has any public comments?
Not at this time.
All right, we will move on then to council, mayor, staff reports. We'll even invite the planning commission if they have anything further they'd like to say. None. Anything from the council?
I think this is a great group. Everybody involved, it's awesome. Hash this out and figure it out.
I love working with you guys. I really do. Listen, what Craig Hall said earlier, you guys should be dang proud of what you do. You really are, because I respect the heck out of what our processes are here, the people that care about their community. You don't see that in a lot of places. I'm telling you, it's.
We're trying. It's always room for
Oh, yeah.
improvement.
We all, and so why?
Yeah, and once again, we do appreciate you and the staff's efforts on putting this together. I'm sure we're not trying to throw anybody under the bus here. I think open discussion, addressing issues, you find there's always room for improvement. Thank you.
I do have one thing.
Yes.
We all got that email from Brian Childs about what we can do about, if anything,
The
John.
raceway?
No, well, we probably have, this is all about the water, and he said, there's a lot of people violating.
Yeah, I've got that down actually.
Okay.
Here. So,
That's all I want to do.
yeah, I think that's Councilman Swanson, Councilmember Stoker. It's a beauty when 9 o'clock strikes, it's Cinderella. Everybody runs out of gas at 9 o'clock.
It's usually 11.
Hey,
Why leave
Don't
early?
get me started.
no room for whiners. All right, there's a couple things I would just like to get the council thinking about. One of them is the comment that Councilman Severing made. I think we're leading out with our parks and limiting the watering there. After today, though, maybe it'd be good not to water them at all, because then the grass wouldn't grow.
We have a mayor that's a real stud. He's been out mowing the parks.
You don't want
I'm too old for this. So I'd like the council maybe to start be thinking about, some at least encouragement on water. I think Councilman Barker indicated my view is already concerned about the water and when that might end up being turned off, but.
Would you like to hear the newest that I've heard from a member of the state?
Is it reputable?
Yes,
Okay, what's that?
water may be shut off in June.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and the problem then, council, we
Some
face
more
is
water.
people are gonna wanna use culinary water.
Except farmers, because we're that low. This is coming statewide, not just. It may. It's
So
That's
Pine
that's
Pine water
secondary.
would be completely shut off.
But then what happens is people go to culinary water, right?
Rain barrels, 6 of them,
Yeah.
got them.
It's gotta rain for those barrels to be any good.
They're
We
full
might
right now.
want, we might want to be thinking council about some
I
suggestions.
would like it to be water wise.
I think it was Lehigh is looking at encouraging an every other day
Well, they implemented that today, but they're culinary only.
there. Well, that's what's gonna happen if this water gets shut off. We're gonna be culinary only. And I think,
It's gonna die, it sounds like.
Yeah.
that is
that
dangerous.
gray?
That is dangerous, right?
Now, were you
there.
moving or is that still?
I was racing at that point. in time.
That would I tell you.
Hey, don't be giving anybody ideas. I actually work.
You need a part-time job? We're hiring.
That's- Okay, the other thing is, council, holy cows. Things will never be the same. in our
Is that where
parks.
he's sleeping on the benches?
Probably, I had to rest, man. Those guys work hard. That's hard work. The other thing is, I wanted the council to be thinking about is, we will be getting money from the federal government, about $2.3 million. I think we're just waiting to request that, primarily used for infrastructure purposes. So if you'd be thinking in your mind, best uses that you may have, and suggesting that we have plenty of infrastructure projects, but we need to prioritize them. So
Was that,
council, if you'd be thinking about that.
was that the $2 million that we were thinking about?
So that was the contribution you were gonna make.
Yeah, but I
No, this is 2.3 million additional
From the feds.
can-
from the feds, and it has certain requirements on infrastructure, streets,
Yeah, but what we're talking about is
water. So
we
John, could you get that list out to the council, please?
Yeah, it's mostly water, sewer, broadband. It's not
It's
police
service,
stations,
it's not
it's.
infrastructure.
Does the planet median quality?
Well, I negotiate that with Brandon. So just some comments I had, anything else for the council? Seeing none, I look for a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
So moved by council. Do we have a second? Cheryl, where are you?
She seconded it.
All right.
She's third.
Anybody object to us adjourning this meeting? All right, thanks for everyone's